Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino? Blimey.
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson had been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. Is an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. A very big welcome to the show on VE Day, the 80th anniversary, an extraordinary day. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. My goodness, if there's one thing those men and women were fighting for, it was for keeping Britain the home of common sense. And we're trying to do that today in our own very, very small ways. Nothing like the sacrifices made by our forefathers and foremothers for our freedoms today. But we're going to talk about that a lot today. Of course, we'll be marking the 2-minute silence at midday on the show as well to say our thanks to those who fought for us to, well, live in freedom today, such as it still is. We've got lots to talk about today, and whether you are listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is really fabulous to have your company today. Right, coming up in this hour, I say we're going to be marking VE Day. We're also going to be talking about the possibility of a trade deal between Britain and the US. It's the first by the White House since President Trump imposed global tariffs earlier this year on what he called Liberation Day. We've still got those 10% tariffs. Looks like they may well remain, but that 25% tariff on cars, on steel and the like could be going. Donald Trump is due to hold a press conference in the Oval Office at 3 o'clock UK time today. We're expecting a statement from the British Prime Minister as well later on. Of course, he will be busy, the Prime Minister, at VE Day commemorations and celebrations. Of course, is the day when Sir Winston Churchill declared victory for the Allies in Europe in the Second World War. Well, also going to be talking about the latest migrant and asylum stories. And my goodness me, there are a lot about. All migrants will have to learn a higher standard of English under Keir Starmer's immigration reforms. We're told are going to be part of those reforms to be announced next week. The idea is tougher plans to ensure that people can integrate and assimilate into British society. I don't know why anyone didn't think of this before, eh? Meanwhile, a shock report from the National Audit Office has revealed the £4 million a day cost to taxpayers on housing asylum seekers in hotels. £15 billion over 10 years. Extraordinary amount of money. It's 3 times what it was estimated to be just a few years ago, because the rocketing costs of those contracts. And everyone's making a pretty penny on this, guys, apart from the taxpayer who is footing the bill. Meanwhile, very interesting, very much under the radar here, but German new government led by Friedrich Merz, basically a Conservative Party leader of a Conservative and Labour coalition, to all intents and purposes there, to keep out the hard-right AfD. They have actually ordered the border police at Germany to turn away undocumented immigrants, including asylum seekers, unless they are very obviously genuine. Unlike an awful lot of the fighting-age men who turn up on our shores on Channel dinghies. The decision rescinds a 2015 instruction during the height of the Syrian civil war that had allowed entry for Why can't we? Plus, a black smoke came out of the chimney on the roof of the Sistine Chapel yesterday, meaning that no pope was elected in the very first vote in a Vatican conclave, described as the hardest to call in 50 years. 2 more votes today. All that coming up, plenty to talk about today. Joining me for all the chat, so appropriately, he's here with us every Thursday, but I'm so pleased he's arrived today on the V-Day anniversary. Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer, and I'm very pleased to see you wearing all of your medals today.
Well, it's an appropriate day as we
He wears them on a Saturday morning on the way to get the paper, to be fair.
Exactly, but today, especially as we're commemorating and remembering the sacrifice that everyone made, and yes, it's right to celebrate the end of the war, but it's also important that we remember that we're commemorating this, because a lot of people, this was the day that the emotional plug was pulled out of them and they realised that the loved ones were not coming back.
Well, and that's the thing, and actually, a lot of people whose loved ones were fighting still in the Far East, they did not see their loved ones coming home so soon. So many men killed, so many men wounded, a huge number of civilians, of course, on both sides, who were dead and wounded. Millions. I mean, this war
50 million in total.
Lives.
50 million. You can't imagine it.
When Donald Trump talks about the meat grinder in Ukraine, we are talking about a different level of warfare there. What are your key thoughts today? Because as I say, it is a day, as you say, of remembering and thanking and being grateful for those people who fought and died for us, for our freedoms, but also celebrating and thinking of the amazing moment of people being told. It is extraordinary. What the. I'm trying to find the notes here. Churchill, when he went to Churchill, he went on the radio. We know so many of his speeches when he talked about fighting on the beaches and this is the beginning of the end. But he announced on the radio yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. At that moment, people knew that it was over, and people rushed to their city centres, to their high streets. We were talking the other day about people being up, the strobe lights on St Paul's and on Westminster Abbey. London lit up at night for the first time in all those years, because it was safe to actually show our city at night, and the celebrations. We also see these wonderful pictures, and of course the Queen and Princess Margaret sneaking out of Buckingham Palace to join the people on the streets. It must have been the most extraordinary moment of, as you say, people coming to terms with all the death and the loss, but of relief and joy.
Relief. The surrealness of it must have been phenomenal.
That would have been everyday life.
Exactly. And Churchill, whenever he gave a speech, it's quite amusing. It was slightly economical with the truth. The Germans actually surrendered twice. They surrendered in the very early hours of the morning to the British, French and Americans in Rheims in France, but the Soviets didn't recognise that, and therefore Field Marshal Keitel had to surrender to the Russians in Berlin on the 8th of May, and that they accepted that as the legal date for the
but the Russians marked the 9th of May.
The Russians then marked the 9th of May, so that's why I think we've got a week's worth of commemorations that are going on, and we're watching
again,
what happens.
it's interesting, the Polish Foreign Minister was doing a broadcast round today and pointing out as the new German Chancellor going to Poland, the crucial thing is they wanted to get that vote through, to get the German Chancellor in place ahead of these events, pointing out that this wasn't Liberation Day for them. They went from the Nazis to the Soviet Union.
Exactly. exactly. And so much changed. The Iron Curtain hadn't quite fallen across Europe at that stage, but people knew that it was coming. And it wasn't until the 15th of August that fighting stopped in the Far East after two atomic bombs had been dropped, causing huge casualties.
Indeed. I mean, people often talk about how, the Americans came to our rescue. It's one of these my bugbears in life. I'm as, America-phile as you can be. They didn't come to our rescue. Churchill pleaded with them. By the way, turned up without wearing a suit in the Oval Office on a number of occasions during the war to try and plead the Americans to come and join us and help us fight the Nazis. They did not. The Americans refused again and again and again and again as our men and women were dying. And it was only when the Japanese unbelievably stupidly bombed Pearl Harbor and then decided, and then of course declared war on America. America declared war back on Japan, and then the Germans decided inexplicably to declare war on America, and then America joined the war. They did not come to fight for us, and I'm sorry, I know a lot of those wonderful young men came over here and did actually die for the cause, and we're very, very grateful for that. But in terms of political leadership, they weren't by our side.
No, they weren't, and actually the Brits had warned the Americans that the Japanese were planning to attack Pearl Harbor through an Enigma intercept, and that had gone because the Americans were in, no, nothing's going to happen to us. It went in at a weekend. It went through someone's pending tray instead of going through at the pressure, because it was foreign intelligence that had come from the Brits.
Didn't really count.
It couldn't mean anything.
But I do think a lot of people, and this is the things I find so upsetting about how young people are taught about our country today and our history and our culture and our values and our traditions and what we stand for. And I think it's also one of the reasons why many people in Europe can't understand why we wanted to leave. Many of us, 52%, remember us, wanted to leave the EU because we don't think the EU is the reason why we have freedoms and why we are a prosperous nation. We know that that's down to us. That's down to the British spirit. That's down to our own abilities and what we've done over the years. Democracy wasn't something we were given. It was something that we fought for. Our forefathers and foremothers fought for every single one of those rights along the way. And it's so galling to me when you see young people today who say they're not proud of their country. They wouldn't fight for their country. They wouldn't die for their country. When the only reason you have the right to even make that decision is because we're not speaking German right now. And we're not speaking Russian right now. We're speaking English. We're in a proud, free, sovereign nation state, speaking our own language with our own history and culture, just about still holding on. And it's because of the willingness of people to fight, and leaders like Winston Churchill, who's now decried as a racist, I mean, by the wokerati. And it is absolutely galling to me that those so many lives were given to keep our country safe, to keep our freedoms, to keep our traditions, and so many people now don't value that and they don't understand the importance. And I think if you want to really honour the sacrifices that those men and women made all those years ago, you need to honour that by fighting for freedom of speech, fighting for our traditions, fighting to uphold the values of this country and the freedoms that we enjoy.
And it's understanding that young people have to be educated in, and we need to get this into our education system. It's shocking that it's not there, and it's shocking that people forget that so many people died so they've got the freedom to protest on the streets.
Yes.
And people forget the rationale behind the EU experiment. It wasn't really to try and bring Europe together in any harmonious way that would create this fantastic organisation. It was to stop Germany and France from fighting, because they'd done it twice in one century.
I mean, the French didn't so much fight.
Well, yes, but
with all due respect to our French friends, les amis,
the Belgians didn't want this to happen because they used Belgium as the battleground in many cases. It was to try and bring European countries together and stop the potential for any further conflict.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, there are so many events today. We've had events obviously since the weekend, and there are lots of parties and street parties going to. A lot of it really happened on Monday. Obviously, of course, the worst day of the weather of the bank holiday, but service in Westminster Abbey, 1,800 people invited to attend, including the King and Queen, veterans, politicians, charities. At midday, we've got that 2-minute silence held across all UK government buildings and departments, and obviously we'll be marking it here in the afternoon. The Royal British Legion will host a private tea party for Second World War veterans and their families at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, and the various other events throughout the day. Pubs being allowed to stay open for an extra 2 hours. Now, if that isn't a British tradition worth fighting for, I don't know what is.
Definitely, and we've got church bells at 6:30 this evening, and then beacons, over 1,000 beacons being lit across the country.
We love a beacon in this country.
About 9:30 tonight. tonight.
There we are then. Is it actually dark by then now?
Ish.
Anyway, look, that's what's going on. And obviously, we're keeping up to date on all of that as well. Let's talk about some other interesting news in terms of alliances. US-UK trade deal. Major trade deal to be announced. We're told by Donald Trump this afternoon at 3 o'clock. This is the first trade deal that has been announced since Liberation Day, when he imposed all those tariffs. We were at the minimum, the 10% tariff. That's now pretty much the rest of the world for a temporary period. But there's a lot of talk that we have done some sort of deal, particularly involving our steel exports and our car exports.
Yeah, and it's coming to the end of the 90 days that Donald Trump put on his reducing everyone to 10%. If the government can get something on the car industry and the steel industry, that'll be fantastic. Of course, we had the announcement earlier in the week of 100% tariffs on our movies and bits and pieces.
Yeah,
but again,
that's a big industry.
It is, but again, there's some talk in the United States I've seen where that does not fall into the legal status that Trump is using to impose tariffs. And actually, there is an exemption in what he's using in American law, and that exemption covers anything in the information domain and includes movies.
Very interesting, very true. Well, we'll wait and see what happens there. We'll talk about that throughout the day. Let's also talk about the latest stories regarding immigration. I mean, it's such a hot topic. Another day goes by, another set of figures, another set of just shocking statistics. We've got this announcement, by the way, not announcement. Next week there's going to be an immigration law announced, a new bill announced, because everyone is running scared of Reform UK, no doubt, after that, those successes in the local elections and the Runcorn by-election last week. And even Labour have woken up to the fact that it turns out this isn't popular, even with Labour voters. They'll vote Reform instead of sticking with them. But all migrants will have to be fluent in English to stay in the UK, is what they are apparently going to announce. Now, whether or not this is actually, they're saying if you're coming to live and work in the UK, be expected to speak much better English. So basically, not your GCSE level, effectively, to all intents and purposes, sort of an A level level. Currently, you only need to show a basic grasp of the language. In fact, quite a lot of Brits have only got a basic grasp of the language. But they say it will be, you have to be able to speak fluently and write confidently on complex issues. But again, they're saying this is about new migrants. But what about the people who are already here? Because I mean, certainly I'm really, really aware whenever I have any hospital treatment or when I'm in a GP surgery, it doesn't appear to me that anybody else in there, in the corridor, in the waiting room, speaks English as a first language, or indeed English at all. The amount of times as in the receptionist sort of having this sort of long, laborious conversation with a lot of pointing and you know, and everyone's just sort of smiling and sighing, trying to get information across to people who are eligible somehow for NHS services but don't speak English. I'm not quite sure how they're paying into NHS services if they're not able to speak English. But shouldn't it have been a given, if you come to this country and you want to come here and live in this country, that you should... I mean, is it that much to ask that you should be able to speak the language? How are you getting a job otherwise? Well,
it should be given. Nobody should be allowed to sign on and get benefits, to get a visa that is over and above a tourist-type visa if they can't speak English. You shouldn't be allowed to stay in the country if you can't begin to speak the language. I lived in Germany for 13 years. All of the administration in Germany is done in German. You do not get an interpreter. If you have to go to a doctor, you're fortunate that a lot of the doctors will speak English, and they do that out of the goodness of their own heart. But you go to they're
not so up on their Somali.
No, definitely not. And you go to fill local forms in at the local council office equivalent or anything else. It's all in German. It's all complex.
I think the same in France as well.
Yeah, you have to do it in German.
Yeah, again, we pay millions and millions and millions for those translation services. We also, and these figures are genuinely... I mean, I say they're shocking. I don't know why we're shocked by anything anymore in relation to the cost of asylum
Doesn't Rwanda
seekers.
sound cheap?
Doesn't Rwanda sound cheap right now? Taxpayers are forking out £4 million every day on migrant hotels and other accommodation. It's more than triple the original estimate that we had back in 2019 for the next decade. Again, they had no one had any plans to deal with the issue because they were planning on it costing that for the next decade. But the original forecast was for contracts for asylum accommodation, hostels, hotels, private rented accommodation, £4.5 billion. Huge sum of money over a decade. That's now expected to run to over £15 billion over the same period. This is true. This amounts £4.5 million a day, okay? and more than £3,000 every single minute being spent on this accommodation. We've now got 110,000 people. That's last December. We've got, what, another 20, 30,000 since? We're 40% up January to now in terms of the number of people who come across in the Channel migrant boats. We now know, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, pointed out that actually, something like 40% of the people who are claiming asylum are people who've arrived here on a student visa or a work visa, been here for 3-4 years, and they go, oh God, you'll never guess what. It turns out I can't go home. I need to claim asylum. And I did have a job, but now I'm destitute. So now I need the taxpayer to pay for all my accommodation and everything else. These numbers are untenable. It ain't going to fly. When people, they're driving their cars over potholes, they're waiting for a GP appointment behind someone in the queue who can't speak English, when they are, struggling to pay their energy bills and their mortgages, when they are struggling. I mean, it's not a day goes by when I go to the supermarket. I'm a good earner, right? And I'm at the supermarket every time. I'm like, how much? I mean, people are really feeling the pinch. People are really struggling. Their own taxes have gone up, national insurance and all of that. They're not going to be seeing wage rises that even remotely cover the inflation that we've had over recent years, whether you're public sector or private sector. Most people are not seeing that. People are just saying, I'm sorry, enough is enough.
Well, the numbers, when you add them together, 110,000 with another 40,000 in there, we've got almost the same number that have come into this country illegally than we have in the armed forces in this country, full stop.
And they're largely of fighting age, these young men.
They're largely of fighting age.
Just saying.
They're not contributing at all. They're
we're told, they can't contribute. Oh no, because if we did allow them to work, of course, they'd all be running businesses and earning 100 grand a year and contributing.
Or be brain surgeons.
No, they already are brain surgeons.
Oh, okay, I forgot that, sorry.
I don't know why people don't know that. Of course, all these young men coming across undocumented at the age of 24 from Afghanistan, of course, these are all highly skilled migrants, highly skilled. Did you not get that memo? I have to remind everyone every day.
I didn't get that memo. I think we should create the equivalent of the French Foreign Legion, have the British Foreign Legion, and whenever they come in, they have to do 10 years worth of service in the British military before they're then entitled to do anything, and we can then send them off to overseas and take the pressure off our boys and girls that are doing a fantastic job at the moment.
I love having you on. You've always got some great ideas. You really, really do. I tell you what's really, really interesting is the German government, this new German government, they have actually announced this plan to basically to cut the number of people entering the country. Remember back in 2015, Angela Merkel said to all the Assyrian asylum seekers, come on in, the water's lovely. We had these people trailing across the country, across the continent of Europe, all heading to Germany, and they ended up with more than 1 million arrivals in that 1 year. By the way, most of them weren't actually from Syria. Everyone would go, I'm from Syria, I just lost my passport. By the way, they've had a massive issue. Sexual assault, violent crime,
gone through the roof.
Terrorism. Most of these people don't speak English, don't speak German or English. They're not working. They're on benefits. It's all worked out absolutely swimmingly, which is why the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, have been doing so well in the polls. New government, which is basically a Conservative and Labour government coalition to try and keep the AfD out again. But it's fascinating because they have announced basically they want to prevent all migrants from crossing Germany's land borders illegally, even if they are claiming asylum. They're basically going to tighten border controls. Third country nationals without documents legitimising residence, i.e. you're not here legally, and with a request for asylum, must be allowed entry, was what the 2015 order was, and now they are changing that, and they're basically saying close the doors to pretty much anybody unless you're a pregnant woman or a child, you're not coming in. Well, how can they do that? But apparently we can't do that.
Well, and the French will take people that don't follow French values and put them on an aircraft immediately and ship them out to some other country. The Italians are trying to process anyone that comes in Albania. Yet we're sitting there. No, we're smashing the gangs. That's our approach.
Smashing the gangs.
We forgot that.
All
we're smashing
going
gangs.
so very, very well. It really is. I mean, we were able to stop Hitler invading, but we can't stop young undocumented men from goodness knows everywhere around the world from invading. It is a very sorry day for our nation. It really
and
is.
there was a plan. It was a flawed plan with Rwanda. Everyone questioned it, but actually there was a plan. There's nothing now.
It was only flawed in terms of the numbers.
Yes.
Australia worked because you don't set foot in the country. You're out. You're never coming in. That's what works. People aren't stupid, they're very rational. By the way, the price of a boat crossing down to about £1,000. At this point, it's going to be the best way for us to get our families across.
That'll be cheaper.
On the way back
It'll be
from a holiday.
cheaper than the ferries or
I know,
Eurostar.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you're crammed in just as much anyway. Love to hear your thoughts on all of this. I'd love to hear from you whether you want to talk about the V-Day commemorations, your thoughts and memories on this day. Are you old enough, young and sprightly enough to remember the moment when this was announced and celebrating with your family, even as a child? Maybe your fathers, your grandfathers fought in the war, and tell us what your thoughts are today. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. I also want to hear from you about these extraordinary asylum seekers, accommodation costing £4 million a day to you and me. But the government saying they're going to demand that all migrants speak fluent English to stay in Britain. Really? Are they? I mean, what about all the people who are already here? Really, you're going to be deporting those tens and tens and tens of thousands of people who don't speak a word of English but have been here for years on benefits? Really? Is that going to happen? I'd love to hear your reaction to that as well. Same number to call, 0344 499 1000. We'll get your messages up next. This is Talk.
It doesn't seem to me that we succeeded very well in remaining British, either in the big things or in detail. And I just think that the rejoicing is all very well, but the rejoicing without thought afterwards is pointless. And when people have put away the Union Jacks and cleared up the street party debris and all the rest of it, and when the pubs have finally closed, I would just urge people to think a lot more about whether we really did win this war.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:28 is the time. Let's get to your messages coming. Let's talk about the messages from VE Day. First of all, your thoughts and memories on this day. We mark the 80th anniversary of that extraordinary day in our nation's history. Eleanor says she has nothing personally. That's it. Exactly for me, my family. I've got no knowledge of any military past in the family at all. Probably all a nation of surrender monkeys knowing my lot. But she says, but lovely to see nursery and primary schools both having VE days for the kids. So lovely to see such pride in our country. It's so important, isn't it? Bill says, RIP the fallen, we will never forget. And Sarah says, my grandfather served in the RAF during the Battle of Britain. I'm so proud to say I'm related to one of our many heroes. Absolutely, Sarah. Edmund says, I'm just glad we as a country still take so much pride in VE Day. And Charlie says, our fallen soldiers will never be forgotten. They fought for our freedom and democracy democracy. Thank you to them for the ultimate sacrifice. And Michael says they were very brave people, and I'm very grateful to and always will. And Anna says, so proud of the men and women who fought and died for us all. As an ex-naval man, I hope we never have to go through what that generation suffered. Naval woman, I'm assuming, Anna, unless we're very confusing. But anyway, 10:29 is the time. Let's go to James, who's on the line in Brittany, who on VE Day. James, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Julia.
How are you? What do you want to say?
Well, me and my wife are over here on a short holiday.
Yeah.
We've been all over Brittany, and I actually ended up going to a German bunker thing on the Atlantic Wall yesterday, and there is nothing. There is no appearance of any celebration of VE Day at all.
That's interesting. I mean, we know there are events. I mean, gosh, you know, France was one of the countries that was liberated. You'd think they might notice it. I mean, I know there are major events going on throughout Europe.
Yeah, but there's no bunting up here. There are no posters that say, you know, on this particular day there's going to be this particular event. And if I could make one other comment, I please hope you like the irony of this. We came out through Plymouth on the Roscoff Ferry, and you go through passport control, and then you go into the customs shed to find around about nine African men who are searching you on the way out.
Sorry, I don't know why you're giggling, James. You've got no idea what you're talking about, my love.
Right, yeah. So when you go through the customs shed, there were nine African men searching the cars and searching people who are leaving.
I mean, were they officials?
Yes. So they got the lanyards on and this, that, and the other. Very strong African accents, but I found it quite ironic that obviously they've come here in one capacity or another. Well,
I mean, again, presumably they are French officials who are doing that job. No.
No, they're this side of the water.
This side. Oh, okay, right. I got a bit confused with that. I'm a bit confused. Well, I mean, I'm very, very happy for people who are working here legally. That's fine by me. But yeah, I get your point, James. Just finally, I mean, in terms of marking VE Day, and how significant do you think this 80th commemoration is?
Sadly, as the time passes, I mean, we don't celebrate the Boer War anymore. We don't celebrate, you know, the First World War hardly gets a look in. As time goes by, these will be less and less significant, excuse me, to people who view them. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, I understand that, James. Thank you for that. That was possibly the strangest call I've ever taken, but there we are, James. Thank you for that. Philip, James is right in terms of the significance will fall away for future generations, and particularly when we don't have when we see, you know, Armistice Day, and you see these just incredibly frail men who just made the ultimate sacrifice, and they're so dignified. It's just so incredible, and they're talking about, you know, don't honour me. I didn't make the ultimate sacrifice. My comrades did, and men, you know, who didn't talk about it. They came back from the wars and they did not talk about it. A lot of, you know, I know you talk about, you know, your PTSD from the times that you've served, but the significance will fall away over the decades.
It will, because there hasn't been anything with that sort of mass total war significance that's encompassed the whole of the country.
Let's hope not again.
And we hope it'll never happen again. There have been lots and lots and lots of conflicts since then that the British military have been involved in.
And war in Europe right now.
I think there's only been 1 year where the British military haven't been deployed in some form of conflict elsewhere. And you know, all of these baubles come from, or most of them come from, different conflicts that I've been involved in.
He's wearing his medals if you've just tuned in. I insisted that he did. He's not a bragger. I just insist that he did on this day. We're very grateful for your service, sir. Let's go to another quick call, though. Andrew's on the line in Hertfordshire. And Andrew, you want to talk about, well, a raft of migration stories. What do you want to say?
Yeah, good morning, Julia. Obviously, that James, he's a weird one. Yeah, that's right. He is effectively a nugget short of a...
No, let's not. Come on.
In relation to the migrants, it's so interesting, this statement. We are always told that the reason they come here is that English is their second language.
Yeah.
So somewhere, someone has twigged within government that the majority of people that are coming here don't speak English. And that is a huge minor point. So what we've got then is illegal migration with people who have no even communication skill that is around written or verbal English. This is an invasion. It's gone past a point, an inflection point, where actually we need to solve it. And the way to solve it, or one of the ways, is to follow the money. To nail bars, these places, locally, Reform could do it, and hit them with local taxes, council tax, raise it by...
Oh, that's not going to touch the size of the sort of money being made, but the daily raids, just get on with it. I mean, there is so much money being made. The barber shops, you know, there's just so... this is organised criminality, that's what it is.
Yeah, what you're targeting is their ability to get cash. So Deliveroo, you hit them with a windfall tax of $4 billion.
Yeah, where's it? I mean, everyone keeps talking about this. Well, could we not just please just be a bit more, you know, they should just be a bit more careful about who they hire. I mean, the odds are now your delivery driver is actually not here legally. I mean, because they're not making the check they say they are, but they're not.
Yeah, they can't. They can't. What you do is you get a license to be a delivery driver and then you sell it on.
Yeah.
Now, the only way to get them is to do that because it attacks the share price of Deliveroo. That's how you change their behaviour.
I don't think legally you'd be able to get away with that. I just think we should just enforce... this is a mad idea. I've thrown this out on the show before. We could just enforce the laws we already have. Yes. Crazy mad idea. Andrew, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. 10:36 is the time. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about all of this with Mark Littlewood of Popular Conservatism. What's the chance of that US-UK trade deal? This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:38 is the time. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the Papal conclave. No decision on a pope yesterday in the first vote. Got that black smoke. I know. David Lammy was very upset about how racist that smoke was. I'm not joking. He genuinely wrote a tweet about that some years ago, but there we are. We're going to be talking about that in a few moments. Philip Ingram there chuckling away in the background. Right now, we'll talk about the conclave papal vote. And up next, then, we're going to talk about, well, the migration and a possible US-UK trade deal with Mark Littlewood. He's Director of Popular Conservatism. Very, very good morning to you.
Hi, Julia. Great to be with you.
Let's start, if we can, with the possibility of this trade deal. It would be the first sign since what Trump called Liberation Day, when he announced it was an extraordinary press conference in the Rose Garden of the White House, where he announced all these big tariffs. We got let off lightly, just the 10%. And then everyone else pretty much went down to 10%, but we've still got the hit, the 25% hit on car exports, steel and aluminium. We're told there's an announcement at 3 o'clock today from the President Trump in the Oval Office. Keir Keir Starmer has said that a trade deal would help to deliver security and renewal for British workers, business and families. He's speaking this morning. He said, as you know, talks with the US have been ongoing. You'll hear more from me about that later today. But make no mistake, I will always act in our national interest for workers, business and families to deliver security and renewal for our country. What do we expect to hear?
Very good question. I mean, it's great, isn't it, Julia, to see a British Prime Minister using our Brexit freedoms to try and strike trade deals with other countries in the world, even if he didn't actually want those Brexit freedoms himself.
Exactly.
But nevertheless, this is good to see. Look, I don't know. And the Trump administration, I understand, caught the UK government a bit by surprise by sort of tweeting out in capital letters that there was going to be a huge, massive, big announcement with a big respected country, which we assume to be the United Kingdom.
We're quite excited they think that about us, aren't we?
Yeah, great. I love the flattery. It's a slightly idiosyncratic way to behave, but nevertheless, I'll take the flattery. Look, what I'll be looking for is, does this just sort of unravel the tariffs that would otherwise been imposed, in which case, fine, that's a step forward, but it only really gets us back to where we were, 2 or 3 months ago before Trump won the election.
But nevertheless, that would make a difference to jobs and companies, but that would be significant for those working in those industries.
Oh, of course. But it would be, if you like, undoing a recent harm rather than actually seizing some bigger, brighter benefits. Yeah. So I hope it goes further than just removing the tariffs that would otherwise be imposed. But look, it's good news. And we've had the India deal, which, again, we should look at the details of. I've got one or two worries about some of the details in that. Let's look at what happens here. But the more we can facilitate the free flow of goods and services between ourselves and the United States of America, the better. Yeah. So if that's a step in that direction, hurrah.
The focus is on jobs here, and again, a lot of high-skilled jobs in those industries. But there's also, it's always this bleeding sort of thing that comes up, like, what about chlorinated chicken? As if these people haven't had buffalo wings in New York or Florida or LA, which, by the way, would have chlorinated. I don't know what people are so obsessed with. We have chlorinated lettuce and salad. We seem to cope just fine with that. But also protecting our beloved NHS as well from encroachment from America. Why are there so many concerns about this still?
I don't know, but let's hear the concerns of the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. I've dug up a tweet from him. David Lammy says on Twitter, "Be in no doubt. A trade deal with Donald Trump will mean US corporations get to privatise and dismantle our NHS one bed at a time." That's David Lammy's rather grim view of it. Now, he did say that tweet in 2019, but I'd like to know what's changed from 2019 to 2025. Look, it's ludicrous. The idea that Donald Trump or the Americans would want to buy our NHS, I mean, what would possess them?
We don't even want our NHS.
Well, it doesn't make any money, right? I mean, it loses a vast amount of money. But on a more serious point, look, if we can facilitate the more easier and cheaper transfer of, I don't know, American pharmaceutical products, for example, that would help the NHS. Yeah. I mean, the idea that sort of any American or any American product ever touching anything to do with British healthcare is a nightmare. What a ludicrous way to look at it. Must be completely the opposite, whatever our Foreign Secretary thinks.
There is usually that rule, isn't there? Well, let's talk about also, immigration and asylum stories today. Not only this staggering revelation from the National Audit Office that asylum accommodation, including hotels, and the vast majority are still in hotels, it was 110,000 back in December, so it's a good, quite a few tens of thousands bigger than that now. It's costing the taxpayer £4.5 million a day, and over 10 years, from 2019 to 2029, costing £15 billion. Now, that is 3 times what it was estimated to cost just 6 years ago, because we've had such an increase in the numbers and, of course, increase in the profits from the organisations like Serco, who are making all those deals and making all that money. This at the same time, as we're told by the leaks from the government, that an announcement is going to be made next week in terms of an immigration law that migrants who come here are going to be required to have a high standard of fluent English, both written and verbal, far more than the basic English skills they need right now. What do you make of both those stories?
Well, the hotel thing's a complete mess. Worth remembering that Labour promised to close down asylum hotels. This is going to be yet another immigration...
And smash the gangs.
None of these are going to come to pass at all, are they? So yet another government, yet another promise on immigration, which is once again going to be broken. Look, there's a multitude of different things here, and I think sometimes we look at this problem down the wrong end of the telescope. I would say that one of the problems we've got is our legal structure makes it damned near impossible to deport anybody in anything like rapid time.
Yeah.
So if you're going to spend 18 months or so, sometimes longer, processing an asylum claim, what are you going to do with that person while you're processing that asylum claim? Answer, you're probably going to put them up in a hotel or something similar. So in order to truncate that, why don't we actually focus on the length of time it's taking?
Yeah.
If you have endless appeals under the European Convention of Human Rights and the Human Rights Act, and you've got clever lawyers who can conjure up sometimes the most minor and trivial issues,
chicken nuggets,
in order nuggets and God knows what else. I've got too many friends on Facebook. That was the latest one I'd heard. Meant you couldn't be deported from the country. If that's going to take 18 months, we're going to face a colossal hotel bill.
Yeah.
So we've got to truncate that system. I'm not suggesting you can make a decision in 18 hours, but maybe in 18 days, right, rather than 18 months. And you put much more burden on the person seeking asylum to prove their case rather than on the government.
The trouble is, the point at which they're not approved, we still can't get rid of them.
No, that's right. So it needs to, I mean, that's
sort of by the by, isn't it? What do you make of, well, the main thing is them not to be in the first place, I would say. And again, we know perfectly well that actually what this government's going to end up doing is they're not going to approve people for asylum. They're going to give them indefinite leave to remain. They'll be on the books. We'll still be paying for them. We'll just be paying for them through benefits and their housing benefit instead of this hotel accommodation. What do you make of the Germans, though? Because the new Friedrich Merz government, this sort of Labour-Tory coalition, effectively, very anti the AfD and their policies on immigration and basically closing the borders, they are actually rescinding Angela Merkel's 2015 order, which basically opened Germany up to pretty much anyone who wanted to turn up. And we saw those million people arriving, some claiming to be from Syria, many not from there. But basically saying that third country nationals, without documents should basically be the default, should be turn them back at the border. You literally don't allow them across the border. That'll put pressure on neighbouring countries, particularly Austria, where a lot of people are arriving through. One assumes then the people in Austria will insist that the government says, well, we won't accept them either, and you cannot go back to the borders. Could this be the beginning of the end of the madness on the European continent?
Yeah, I mean, it does look like the start of some sort of common sense, and I think you're right, Julia, that if, Germany go down this path, there will be that domino effect, right? And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you've got to, I think, switch the burden of proof. If somebody just turns up, puts their hand in the air, says, I'm terribly sorry, I've lost all of my paperwork, but, believe me, I'm of this or that sexuality, or a member of this or that political party, or I have this or that beliefs, you can't possibly send me home. The authorities then need to try and disprove that. Well, I would put the burden of proof on the individual, not the burden of disproof on the authorities. And what's interesting is these sort of ideas would have been described as sort of far-right lunacy only a few months ago. Well, the new, very wet, very middle-of-the-road German government seems to be willing to embrace a much tougher plan than the Labour government is even willing to contemplate. So I would take a leaf out of the Germans' books and do that sort of thing here as well.
Well, yeah, we shall see. They may be forced to do so, eh? Really good to talk to you, Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Philip Ingram, your response to that?
I agree. We could take the leaf out of the German books and we could be much harder, and it wouldn't be difficult with the size of majority that the government's got in Parliament to make sure that the law was clarified, that you couldn't have these endless appeals to keep people here.
But the main thing is to stop people coming in, whether it's on the boats or whether it's being able to climb. Well, this idea of a crackdown on the countries where people are arriving who have a very bad track record of going, oh, it turns out after my student visa is over, I need to stay here.
And we need offshore processing. And one other thing that Mark said, the NHS, American companies coming in. My father-in-law had his heart traces sent off to a company so that they get them interpreted on behalf of the NHS to get in, because it's the most cost-effective way of doing it. It's an American-based company. We're already getting services from America. It doesn't mean we're selling the NHS out. It doesn't mean we're going to be paying US rates for stuff. It's still free for him at the point of need.
Absolutely. 10:48 is the time. We'll take a quick break. Up next, going to talk about the Papal conclave. It continues today. 2 votes today, but apparently it's the hardest one to call, of which man in a dress is going to get the big job. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
It's a crisis which ultimately Britain might want to interpose itself, the Foreign Office might want to mediate, but ultimately either China or the United States are the two potential big powers who can knock heads together. But as I say, China has a lot of interest in backing Pakistan. Donald Trump has said he'd like to mediate, but he's also been very friendly to Prime Minister Modi of India.
Right.
And there are all sorts of good reasons for America and India to get together, the two biggest, as it were, democracies in the world and so on.
Yeah.
But it does make it very difficult to find a genuine, honest broker.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for your company. Let's talk now about the decision, well, the moves to elect a new Pope after the death of Pope Francis. The Papal conclave began to meet yesterday. 133 cardinals, all the cardinals under the age of 80, entitled to have a vote. It's a secret ballot. Takes place in the Sistine Chapel, behind closed doors, windows boarded up, mobile phone signals blocked, you name it. The black smoke was seen rising from the Sistine Chapel chimney yesterday, and that meant that the first vote did not result in a pope being chosen. Black smoke has just been seen in the last couple of moments rising from the chimney yet again. That means their first vote of today has also not resulted in a final result. Well, let's talk about all of this now with Gavin Ashenden. He is a British Catholic layman. He's also an associate editor of the Catholic Herald and former chaplain to the Queen. Very good morning to you.
Julia, hello, good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're expecting two votes today, or they could do two votes. One vote, it appears, has already taken place. If we saw white smoke, that means they'd agreed a new pope. Black smoke means two votes in and they still can't agree. What do we read into that?
It's very exciting. As you were saying in your introduction, this is one of the most difficult elections to call. Actually, they're all very difficult, partly because the process is to go in and say your prayers and ask God for help. It's a bit more than just politicking and choosing your favourite team. So we always knew it was going to be a while. The political analysis is that if you look at it from a liberal-conservative split, that the quicker it happens, the more likely it is to be a liberal. The longer it takes, it may well be somebody more Catholic. So the fact that you've had black smoke this morning is terribly encouraging to somebody like me. And it could be 2 or 3 days. So in the Middle Ages, they took so long once, they took weeks and weeks, that the local people got fed up and they stopped giving them food and took the roof off the building so the rain would drive them to a quick vote. So we don't expect it to work out quite like that, but we don't know how long it'll take.
There are ways of forcing these things come to a decision. And this is the battle, is it, between sort of liberals and conservatives? Because we know that the vast majority of these cardinals were actually appointed by Pope Francis, but who's seems to be regarded as quite a liberal pope. But again, as an atheist, I suppose one can have different views on what counts as liberal or not. But in terms of the things that are being considered by the different sort of factions, and yes, it is very political. It's about where the Pope comes from, what they stand for, what direction they would take the church in. There's an awful lot. I mean, the Western media are obsessed with this. Like, is it someone who is from Africa or from Asia? But will those considerations override the personal preferences of the cardinals making a decision? Some of which may be based on whether they think that a new Pope would be look on them very kindly and promote them.
Well, you're raising the biggest question of all, which is, should the Pope be a Catholic? And I mean, we could talk liberal progressive. I'd rather talk about resistance and appeasement, because the civilization that we've been part of is basically built on Christian foundations. Yeah. Of course, there've been a lot of other offshoots, but even secularism and Protestantism were given birth to by struggles within the Catholic Church. So most people agree that we're at a very interesting civilizational crisis for all kinds of reasons. We've got the influence of the left, the growth of Islam. We've got technology with AI, which threatens to rob us of some of our autonomy. I see this much more as a kind of Chamberlain-Churchill moment. Are they going to elect someone who's going to try and appease the culture, which is what I think Pope Francis did? Or are they going to elect someone who's going to resist it and say, look, all the very best things about our culture were actually given to you by the Catholic Church and a vision of Jesus, we're going back to our roots. We're going to resist what is in fact taking away some of the most important aspects of our humanity: free speech, freedom of conscience, the value of human beings beyond their economic worth. Those are the kind of core values I think that Christianity brings to this. Question is, are we going to get an appeaser or a resistor?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because Pope Francis, you know, he sort of said a lot of the, I don't know, the usual sort of woke things on climate change and Palestine and things like that. There seemed to be some questions about his views on homosexuality. Of course, you know, we're not going to have a female pope. We're not one who's openly female anyway, anytime soon. But there is this big battle going on within the church between the sort of, you know, should we say, I mean, conservative is an understatement of some of the African church leaders and many in South America as well. Asia, very, very different from the church in the Northern Hemisphere.
Well, one of the candidates on the resistance side is a very tall, elegant black pope. And it's a bit of a, you know, it's an irony, really, that people you might think of as conservative want a tall, clever, holy black man as to come to the church. So we don't fall into the kind of woke spectrum criteria quite as much as other people think. But I really think it's about a sense of sort of geopolitical, philosophical analysis. What's happening to the world? What are the? How can we protect human beings from some of the forces that threaten to come against us and destroy our society? Democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, the sacredness of human beings. These aren't things you can take for granted. And who's going to fight for them if it isn't the Catholic Church? And that's not me being tribal, but I look at the political movements we've got and the philosophical movements, and frankly, I don't see anything more attractive than Catholicism, which is why I became one.
Well, that's it. Yeah, but you're as a former chaplain to the Queen and now co-presenter of the Catholic Unscripted podcast. But again, this is the interesting thing. I mean, as an atheist, I completely recognise, you know, the vital importance of the Judeo-Christian culture and history and teachings as a basis of the foundational values of the Western civilization. And anyone who forgets that, I think, really is missing the point. Just finally, very briefly, how significant a role does the Pope play? I grew up at a time when remembering, you know, Pope John Paul II and his role as a Polish man in terms of, you know, what happened with the bringing down of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union. He seemed like a very significant figure. Are popes so significant, or is that something that an individual pope can bring to the job?
I think they're hugely significant. I mean, there are two ways of looking at this. One is that we've got our own problems that need dealing with. There's been a sexual scandal and a financial scandal. Catholics are human beings. We suffer the same vulnerabilities as anybody else. The Pope's got to clear those up. But actually, when you think of it, he's the inspired leader of 1.4 billion people. If you can get 1.4 billion people on the same agenda, then the chances of renewing our culture are really very large. If he has the capacity to win the hearts and minds of Catholics and renew the church, the sky's the limit. Well, it's heaven, really, we're talking about.
Thank you so much. So interesting if you joined us. Amazing. At the moment at which we were just coming to you, that black smoke sharing from the Sistine Chapel, Gavin Ashenden, co-presenter of the Catholic Unscripted podcast, British Catholic layman. Fascinating, that, Philip. I mean, how significant do you think the Pope is still as a figure?
I think hugely significant. I think the Pope is a unique position to act as a conscience for other world leaders, because he's not running a country. He's got 1.4 billion in
normally accountable.
Well, yes, exactly.
Yeah, there we are. Just to let you know, we're going to take headlines at 11 o'clock. Don't forget that 2-minute silence at midday to mark VE Day 80th anniversary. Just some words from Donald Trump there in America about that big and exciting day, he's calling it, on his post on Truth Social for the US and UK. It looks like there is some sort of a trade deal that's going to be announced in just a few hours' time. We'll bring you all the details on that later in the show. Lots more coming up, including your calls. This is Talk.
Which is much bigger every
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
87222, start your message with the word talk. Who would you send to space and why?
The person I would love to send to space would be Mr. Keir Starmer. And then I would tell the Galactic Empire that he was part of the Rebel Alliance and let them blow him away with the Death Star. No Brits was involved, no fingers could be pointed.
You carry on taking the medication, George. Yes, I'd send all the Labour government to space with a one-way ticket and throw in the SNP for being useless. They're all a bunch of... Oh, all right, fair enough.
One person, quite frankly, I think needs to go to space in a one-way journey is Jeremy Kyle. He goes on about his age one more time, how he's 60 this year, he was 59 last year, repetitively over the course of the weeks and months. We have to hear him, I'm 60 this year, I'm 60 this year.
Richard Tice, did you put that cheeky bugger up to that?
I'm hoping he's going to send me the invoice because that was absolutely brilliant.
Which MP would you send to space?
Oh, no, I'll get in terrible trouble if I answer that. But it's fair to say there's quite a long list.
The sad thing is about sending people into space on a one-way ticket is I don't think that we've built a spaceship big enough to take the lunatics off this planet. I mean, from the net zero loonies to the transgender loonies to the racists to the terrorists, there is just so many to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send Ed Miliband to space, I think.
Oh, that is an outrageous question to I'm not even going to answer that question.
Sam Matterface, do you get the job, yeah? Come on.
No, Sam Matterface, I tell you what... There's no.
I think David Lammy would be the person I'd want to send up in space and never come back again.
Yeah, the problem is how much would the bill be for him to munch through whatever food on the way there?
Hey, it worked.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you and welcome to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Absolute pleasure to have your company today, whether you're listening on DB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And with you live all the way until 1 o'clock. Coming up in the show, of course, we will be marking that 2-minute silence at midday to remember those who died and sacrificed for us to, well, have the freedoms to even have a station like this and have these conversations, to argue, to criticise governments, to be free to speak our minds, such as we still are today, and to thank all those sacrifices made by not just those in the trenches and those in the skies and those on the seas, but also those back at home in Blighty, fighting and sacrificing for that amazing cause. We'll bring you that 2-minute silence in just under an hour's time. Lots to talk about today, including, of course, VE Day commemorations, plus Britain and the United States expected to announce a trade deal later today in about 4 hours' time. Press conference due to be held by Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and it is set to announce, we understand, the first trade deal since Liberation Day, when he announced all those tariffs. We don't know how far it goes. We think it may well be at least, the very least, rolling back those 25% tariffs on our car exports and our steel and aluminium. That will certainly save key jobs and save key money for this economy. Certainly in the last 10 minutes or so, Donald Trump has put out a post on his Truth social media site saying this should be a very big and exciting day. We shall see. Also, we're going to be talking more about these immigration and asylum stories, as all migrants will have to learn a higher standard of English under Keir Starmer's immigration reforms. That's what's going to be announced next week, we understand, as part of tougher plans to ensure that they integrate into society. Well, good luck with that. Meanwhile, a shocking report from the National Audit Office has revealed that £4.5 million a day of taxpayers' money is being wasted on housing asylum seekers in hotels. £4.5 million a day. The total cost so far is 3 times more than they thought it would be in 2019 over a 10-year period up to 2029, 15 billion quid. I'm telling you right now, by the time we hit 2029, it'll be way more than that. Interesting, though, as we've just been talking about, Germany's new government has ordered border police to turn away undocumented immigrants, including asylum seekers, unless they are obviously genuine. This rescinds the 10 years ago instruction from Angela Merkel back in 2015 during the Syrian civil war to basically allow entry to anyone who wanted to come in. 3 million immigrants later, not working out so well for Germany. Who would ever have guessed it, eh? Some of us said it was a mad idea at the time, but of course that was when we were all racists and bigots for saying the truth. But there we are, how times change. Also coming up at midday, interest rates are widely expected to be cut, with further falls predicted for later in the year. We're looking at a cut from 4.25%, to 4.25% from 4.5%. That's thought to be very likely from the Bank of England. Well, fingers crossed to anyone with a mortgage, eh? Joining me for all the chat today, I'm delighted to say, is Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer, and better than that, he was also joined by his whole array of medals, which I insisted that he wore in the studio. A very good morning once again, Philip.
Good to be here.
I know I've made you do this before, but given that it is VE Day, 80th anniversary, I know he's too young and beautiful to have been able to have fought in the Second World War, but you've been in a number of other conflicts. Can you just talk us through very quickly, for those watching, a bit of a point, if you're not watching, you're missing on a treat here. We've got a whole array of medals, what they are for.
Yeah, well, I was born 20 years after the end of the Second World War, so yeah, it shocked me. That's the member of the Order of the British Empire, the cross, that's awarded by Her Majesty the Queen. Next to that is the General Service Medal 1962 with clasp Northern Ireland. Then we've got the United Nations Medal for Croatia and Bosnia, and then we've got the NATO medal for Bosnia, the NATO medal for Kosovo, and an unusual one, NATO medal for the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Very few people were deployed in that. Next to that, I've got the Iraq medal, and then the Queen's Golden Jubilee medal.
Get him. Thank you for your service. Now, that's interesting because we talk about the end of war in Europe, but of course we had a number of wars in Europe. With former Yugoslavia in my lifetime. We've also got a war right now in Europe, in Ukraine, that is ongoing, and there's talk about us going as a peacekeeping force. Today is such an important day. We've had 4 days of celebrations. This is the final day marking this 80th anniversary. It's a very significant anniversary, I think, particularly because of the war in Ukraine, but also particularly because it's the last major sort of anniversary with a zero in it, big anniversaries which get more obviously attention, where it is likely we will have people who have served in that war still present. A lot of people have been talking about their memories, talking about his children being taken to Piccadilly Circus for the celebrations at that moment. And I just want to read again what Churchill had to say at the start of his radio broadcast all those years ago. Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. This was life-changing, life-saving for so many millions of people around Europe. But of course the war in the Far East continued. Yes. VJ Day wasn't until August. Your thoughts on this day as a former serviceman yourself?
It's one that very, very poignant. When you get to the end of a conflict, you get the end of an operation, it almost feels like an anticlimax. It almost feels like a plug's been pulled out, the emotions just disappear.
So you're living on adrenaline for so long.
Exactly, and we've got a country that's been living on adrenaline, and that's why people have gone out to let their hair down. And some will have celebrated, some will have wanted to hide away because they will have known that their loved ones are not coming back. And whilst they see the joy in everyone else's faces, and they feel as if they should have that joy, they don't, because they have lost people very close to them, and it's a day therefore of so many different emotions all coming together. And
that's the thing, because lots of people will be looking back at grandfathers and fathers, great grandfathers who lost their lives, who sacrificed ultimately. And we were talking a little bit earlier, and I'd love to hear your reactions, your thoughts on this. And do give us a call 0344 499 1000 to have your say. I'll give you more of the details in a moment, as if you don't know them already. Is that it is important that we live up to their legacy. Yeah. That we don't just say, oh, that was something that happened in the past, job done, thanks very much, really appreciate it. And then we just carry on day to day. It is so clear to me, whether it's over lockdown, whether it's freedom of speech on anything and everything. I mean, even the trans madness, you know, comes into this. Every conversation's about immigration, every conversation we have, Brexit, everything. That it all comes down to the ability of people to speak freely, to debate, to criticise the government, to criticise the state, to criticise church, monarchy, to have open debate, to be able to live under the rule of law. All of these things, they have to be fought for, whether in the trenches or just day to day in the courts or in Parliament. They have to be fought for by every new generation, don't they?
They do, and people, you have to recognise the reality. The reality of living through total war, the reality that it was one person that started this, Hitler, with what he's built up as his regime. We've got dictators like Hitler with Vladimir Putin and others around the world that could easily start wars. And therefore, whenever the government is asking for people to pay a little bit of extra tax or more money to be allocated to defence to stop us getting into that position again. I've been involved in wars in Europe through former Yugoslavia. As you said, we've got a war in Europe between Ukraine and Russia. That could easily bubble over and turn into a total war again. We don't want that, and therefore it's recognising that, it's remembering it, it's remembering the detail and the horrors.
And remembering also the US President who pointed out the best way of avoiding war is speak softly and carry a big stick. We need to improve our stick. If there's any day-to-day want an announcement on spending money on defence, and it's got to actually be spent on the right stuff. I don't really care what the amount is. What do we need to protect ourselves? And we've had that, that terror threat, which it looks like it was on the Israeli embassy. That has been sort of unofficially confirmed. The Iranian suspects, one believed to be very close to the Iranian regime. We've got the threat from Russia. I mean, yes, they're not going to roll tanks over the sea. Of course they're not. But a real, genuine threat, certainly a threat to the Baltics. Certainly the Finnish and the Swedes think they're a threat. That's why they've joined NATO in the last few years, and certainly the Poles and others recognise that threat. They've lived under Russian rule. They know what that means. So many people want to put their head in the sands and to say, no, not our problem. It's not our war. Well, neither was Sudetenland until it became our war.
Exactly.
And that's the reality.
And we are a global entity. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. We are one of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. We have global reach and global trade. We've got global interests with sovereign territories based around the world. And therefore, I'm sorry, the conflicts that are happening around the world are of interest to us. They directly impact us. Look at the impact that there was in the energy prices whenever Russia attacked Ukraine. It hurt us in the pocket. So anyone who says it's nothing to do with us and we should withdraw is very, very naive.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do get in touch. As I say, the number to ring is 0344 499 1000. What are your thoughts and memories on this day? And indeed the significance not just of what men and women did, at home and on our fighting forces to get this victory. But what we should learn from that today, and particularly, I was saying earlier, I'm horrified by the number of young people who say this country isn't worth fighting for. Well, if you tell young people for a generation that their country has done nothing but wrong and ill in the world and is responsible for everything that's ever gone wrong in the world, of course they won't think the country's worth fighting for. Our country is worth fighting for. There's a reason why people are getting on rickety boats to come across the channel to be here. That's the reason why, because actually we're not perfect, but we're not bad. But we're not bad. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. And of course, calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. Free on YouTube, free of course on X. Can't wait to get to more of your messages. Also, let's talk about this trade deal. US trade deal looking likely. We're told by the US President in the latest post on Truth Social, this should be a very big and exciting day. I don't know how big and exciting trade deals are. It sounds like it's going to be sort of rather smaller than the big all-encompassing trade deal that the British government, whether Tory or Labour, have been trying to get. But if it can at least roll back those 25% tariffs on cars and aluminium and steel, that would be a good start, wouldn't it?
It'll help enormously. Our car industry has been hard hit by the impact on exports to the United States, to the point where Jaguar Land Rover at one stage stopped its exports until they could really understand what's going on. But it's
also presumably in the hope that these tariffs would kind of disappear again in a few weeks.
Exactly.
Which they kind of, I mean, other tariffs did.
Other tariffs did, and this is where Donald Trump is using this to create political capital for him around. We have to see what we've given him in getting this rolled back. We have to see exactly how much it's rolled back to. He might just bring it back to 10% and just have a flat 10% across the board. I don't think they're going to disappear completely.
No, exactly. We may well still keep that. Of course, the usual nonsense about chlorinated chicken and selling off our NHS.
Yeah.
I mean, really?
Yeah, but people just... They're headlines. We've got sound bites. And the trouble is the sound bites are coming out of some senior politicians. And they should realise that this is wrong. The sound bites that we're going to privatise the NHS. Well, I hate to tell you, folks, that the whole of the primary care in NHS is private.
Yes, GPs
are private.
Well, also, I've had a number of the older relatives who've been having, cataract operations over the last few years, largely, through the NHS, and then you're sent to a private unit.
And the NHS is not about who pays for the doctors and nurses, who pays for the hospital building, and what the body is that does that. It's about getting care at the point of need for free, because also, you've already paid for it.
I did think it was fascinating. There's the talk about reform and doing so well in the elections last week, and then particularly Labour saying, this is a party, they want to sell off, privatise the NHS. I just don't think that's the threat they think it is anymore. They want to have a social insurance system, like in Europe. What? Where they don't have waiting lists like we have, where they get really good quality care, and if you've got cancer, heart disease, diabetes, you'll live about 5 years longer.
Yes.
Yeah, how awful. Oh, let me cry at the thought of that. I mean, they're living in a fantasy land, they really are. And again, no one's going to buy the NHS because we don't want it, and frankly, if they want to buy it, off you go. Anyway, let's talk about the latest immigration stories as well, because these figures are absolutely astonishing. These latest figures on the staggering cost of Britain's asylum problem, it's released by a National Audit Office report, so it's not a political party saying it. These are the people who number crunch. They know their numbers. The original forecast for the cost of housing asylum seekers, so hotels largely, about 3/4 in hotels, again, bearing in mind that Labour was going to get rid of the hotels. That's working out well. And also other accommodation. It was forecast to be £4.5 billion back in 2019 for the next decade. Still a huge sum over the decade. Now that prediction in total over that decade, 2029, is over 15 billion quid. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be more than that.
Oh, yes.
We are spending a huge amount of money. There's a huge amount of profit being made by the three companies. They are Serco, Clear Springs Ready Homes and Mears Group, who are basically supplying this accommodation. They're making so much profit, they're even paying, double the normal rates that hotels get and that private landlords get to get accommodation. This is £4.5 million a day it's costing us, £3,000 a minute, and there's no prospect in sight that these numbers will go down. Those gangs ain't smashed. No prospect in sight these people will be, even if they get speeded up in terms of the asylum approval or disapproval, system, that they won't carry on appeal after appeal. Even if we decide you can stay, or even if we decide that you can't stay, they're not going to leave the country. We're still going to be paying for them.
Well, and that number, eye-watering number, is just the hotels. We're paying for all the legal costs to go through everything. We're paying for them to go and go through the NHS. We're giving them pocket money. We're paying to feed them. We're paying to give them driving lessons. We're paying to give them internet access and everything else. And we're getting nothing back. That 15 billion is a drop in the...
Apart from when we let them work, they're not allowed to work currently, but when they're off the asylum system and they're allowed to work, and then we find out they're all first-class engineers and doctors.
Who have to claim benefits.
And you have to claim benefits. Genuinely, it's absolute madness. Germany, it seems, has woken up to a certain extent. I think this is absolutely fascinating. I haven't seen this in the British media yet, but yesterday, the new German government, again, it's a wishy-washy wet government. It's a Labour-Tory coalition with a Tory, effectively a Tory Chancellor in Friedrich Merz. They revoked the instruction that went out from Angela Merkel back in 2015, which this is what it said. Third country nationals, i.e. anyone who turns up on your border, without documents, most of our lot who come on the boats, legitimising residence, So documents literally, as in you've got no right to be here, or saying where you are from, and with a request for asylum must be allowed entry. Well, they got 1 million people that year, 3 million in total. It overrode this idea that you had to claim asylum in the first European country or safe country you got to. Basically, doors were open, everyone came in. It's worked out absolutely awfully for the German people, and indeed the German political class, which is why the AfD are doing so well. They have rescinded that. And basically the rule is now, the default is you don't allow those people to enter. If you haven't got passport, or you haven't got a right to be here, you haven't got a visa, you ain't coming in. Now, the domino effects of that on Austria and other neighbouring countries will mean that they're going to have to keep those people, or they may do the sensible thing and say, no, you're not coming into our country first. Could this, Philip, could this be the beginning of the end of the madness?
Well, it should be, and it's good to see Germany taking the initiative. It's a shame that the UK is not leading, because you were outside Europe and we could do that. Mark Littlewood made a very good point earlier when he turned around and said, instead of the burden of proof being on us to try and disprove.
You're not at risk of being tortured.
Exactly. It should be on the asylum seekers to prove that they are who they say they are, and they are, to prove that they're at risk. And if they can't do it, get rid.
Yeah, but even again, when they appeal, and it's utter nonsense, and we've seen a case after case, virtually a new one every day, of the utter nonsense that they're allowed to claim. Chicken nuggets, a paedophile allowed to have a family life with kids he's not even allowed to see unsupervised because he's a paedophile, but being allowed to stay in the country.
Exactly, and look at Rwanda. That was a cheap solution as compared to what
it would only have been cheap if we sent everyone there. Yeah. I've always said, in principle was right, the right of the government to change the law, and I just don't think human rights lawyers should be in charge of everything in this country. I don't remember electing them. Unfortunately, apparently people did elect a human rights lawyer in Keir Starmer. Would they go so far as this? Well, no, because it's Bleeding Heart and all these people, all these poor people, all these apparently young 23-year-old men from various countries in Africa and the Middle East apparently are the most deserving causes for asylum here. It's an abject nonsense, and it makes such a mockery.
Yeah, well, clearly the education the countries they come from is superb, because they're all consultant brain surgeons.
Yeah, well, indeed. But of course, now we're told that the solution next week is going to be cracking down. People are going to be required to speak a higher level of. This is the point when I'm not going to be able to speak English myself, obviously. About speaking more fluent English, and writing it as well. So we're looking at more A-level standard than GCSE standard. I mean, most Brits can't manage A-level standard English, so we'll see how that goes. But it's unclear to me from the leak, and I think, because again, we don't know the full story and whether this is going to happen. Is this for people arriving here, or is it also for people who are currently here and don't yet have indefinite leave to remain? And by the way, why are we giving all these people a right to stay here who can't speak English?
And the bill that the NHS is currently paying, that local police are currently paying for interpreters, because everyone comes in and says that they can't speak English and therefore get interpreters in to do everything.
Not a single interpreter, that's my rule.
Well, exactly.
Find a charity to pay for it.
It takes a GP to deal with someone with an interpreter 2 sessions to do the same thing that they do with someone who can speak English.
That's why you're not getting an appointment.
That's why you're not getting an appointment.
Simple. It is. Yeah, it is a massive.
Simple math.
It's certainly around my way. It really is a massive issue. And again, I don't even care if you're here legally. I still think you speak English. I would not go and live in a foreign country and expect everyone to speak. I mean, other than you're sort of in a tourist hotel, and you. But I was in Italy at the weekend, and I would just say, parlo inglese, grazie. I'd say, I'm just say. You say, I'm so sorry, my Italian's not very good, but I certainly would try and speak the basics. But I'm only here for the weekend, spending money. If I'm planning to make my life there, I'd be fluent in Italian.
Yes. Yeah, and you need to be. In different countries around Europe, you cannot survive unless you're fluent. I know a lot of people that live in different countries across Europe, and they say exactly the same. You have to be fluent in the language.
Uno Aperol Spritz, I find, is very easy to translate. That's just me. Right, I do want to hear from you on this issue as well, this £4 million a day on hotels for asylum seekers, but we're going to demand all migrants speak fluent English to stay in Britain. Do you think they'll actually follow through with that? I just don't see it. I can't think of a single thing that any government has said they're going to do of any political hue that they've ever actually done.
Smash the gangs? Oh, no.
They genuinely do the opposite. I want to know your reaction. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call as well to talk about VE Day, 80-year anniversary. What are your thoughts and memories on this day in terms of also us carrying on fighting for what our forefathers died for? 0344 499 1000 is the number. Text the word talk in your message to 873. treble 2. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1 standard network rate message. Right now, before we go to a break, it is time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football. Yes, the Champions League final. Maybe not so enticing if you're an Arsenal fan after last night, but commiserations, everyone. But we're also putting £5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Have a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win that VIP trip, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May, 11 p.m. A text will cost you £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have bill payer's permission. Or you can just send your name and number by post to Champions League Final Comp, P.O. Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP. It must arrive by 5 p.m. on May the 21st.
Indeed, well, good luck with that. Now, this is Talk. We're going to go to a quick break, then we're going to get your messages up on air. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Electric cars will succeed, they fear, yes?
The modern version of Guy Fawkes is the electric car charging point. So MPs and peers are slightly up in arms about this. You know, a number of them, as you say, have gone along with the kind of hectoring government propaganda that everyone should get electric vehicles. And now there are going to be very few charging points. The ones that are at issue are in an underground car park. It's not a car park that people walking past the Houses of Parliament would probably be aware exists.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you very much, Steve, for joining us. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram's still with me as well. Let's get some of your messages, your thoughts and your memories about VE Day, the 80th commemoration today. Tony says these men would roll in their graves if they saw the state of the country they fought and died for. Rest in peace, heroes. David says, rest in peace, all those who fought for the freedoms of the modern world. And Julie says, I just hope the new generations understand the importance of their freedoms because of the sacrifices of many men and women. And Sally says, RIP our fallen heroes. I fear, though, that as a country, we've learned nothing. Oscar says, sadly, my memories are only of wartime films as a child. RIP our fallen soldiers. And Nigel says, VE Day celebrating our brave forefathers. My dad flew in a Lancaster bomber during the war. He was a wireless op with the 61st Squadron based at RAF Waddington and Scampton. An absolute legend. What a wonderful thing to say about your father. Beatrice says, our once great patriotic country, the men that went to war were heroes. Now look at this nation. Messages also coming in about the immigration issue and the £4 million a day on hotels for asylum seekers, and also there's requirement to migrants to speak fluent English to stay in Britain that we understand is going to be announced next week. Brian says what Keir Starmer wants is the boats to stop or at least to slow down. Life is hard in the UK with many people struggling to pay their bills and live a good life. Nothing is being done, which is causing increasing resentment. Starmer just doesn't listen. Daniel says, yep, absolutely. Absolutely. They must learn English. This should have been a requirement at the beginning. I mean, who thought it wouldn't be? I mean, crazy. Taken far too long for this to become a policy. Andrew says, so we're going to be paying to teach them English then. That's how this is going to play out. You're quite right. We already do pay for English language lessons for asylum seekers. Grant says, leave the ECHR immediately and carefully nudge the boats around back to France. Any problem, then confront the French with, well, these are boats that you have accidentally missed from stopping. Martin says, if I smashed a window and then moved to a town over, the police would track me through cameras and arrest me. So why can people come into a whole other country who we don't know when we don't know their criminal background? This is a very good point. Murphy says it's nonsense. Every word and every action is nonsense. No one is going anywhere. It's all lip service. And Anthony says it's £4 million a day for 3 different hotel groups. It does not include all the independent hotels. Yeah, there's probably extra spending there. I'm telling you, that total £15 billion is going to be way more by the end. We've got such huge numbers coming in. Let's go to the calls now. 0344 499 1000. Grace wants to have her say. She's in London. Good morning to you, Grace.
Morning. And I'll just say before I forget, hugest respects to those who stood up for our country in VE Day, and for those who did their best here on the home front and contributed to the war effort in various ways. And when it's said that things are tough here in Britain, I think indeed that there are various things that are tough in various ways. However, my grandmother was thrilled by the fact that she could watch TV and she could speak on the phone whenever she wanted, and she could choose food that she liked in the supermarket. And lots of people of previous generations had a much tougher life than most of us do now.
Very good point.
We can forget that sometimes. And I'm also personally really conscious of the fact that there are people suffering from war elsewhere in our world that we don't hear very often about. We do hear an awful lot about Israel and Gaza, and I am very concerned about people who are suffering there, but we don't often hear about people who've been forced from their homes in Sudan, for example, who are literally starving. I kind of wonder why it is that some people think that only some people fleeing war, i.e. in Gaza, matter and not people in Sudan. I'm wondering why that imbalance, but
it is interesting.
A quandary of mine. But I think with regard to immigration hotels, one thing that doesn't get quite enough airtime is that a ton of this money is ending up in the pockets of Serco and various middlemen and management companies. And the Times did an investigation on this last year where they found that between £127 and £148 a day is spent per person in a hotel, a total of 8 million per day, but between £40 and £80 of that 127 to 148, so that's probably about half in most cases of that money is going to middlemen companies.
Yeah, absolutely. They're making a fortune.
So I think rather than just having an acrimonious conversation about what we think about migration, we really need to be pushing for the system to be a better use of taxpayers.
Well, this is a government procurement issue, isn't it? I mean, why pay, for instance, even when they're buying up, rental agreements with local properties, forcing other working British people out of those properties? Why are they paying twice as much? Why are they paying twice as much for those properties than the market rate? Why would we have to pay that extra? I mean, because the government's willing to pay it. It's madness.
Well, I'm not an expert in how all of this works, but I presume that some of the contracts set up under the previous government need to be readdressed imminently, and that's what our government needs to be getting on with, as well as getting on with looking through claims better, because there are some people who are fleeing desperate situations and there are some people who aren't, and so they need to get really good at sorting that out. And we can't just say we'll turn them all away. And if we care about British values, then we should care about the fact that, Jesus told us to love our neighbours, meaning people from other parts of the world.
Well, I mean, you can love people. It doesn't mean you have to let them into your country. But can I just say that no one getting on a boat arriving in this country from France is fleeing war.
One of my personal concerns as well, that doesn't get talked about very often, is that a lot of the money being spent on hotels is coming out of the limited overseas aid budget. And I personally really wish that money could go to the people who are still stuck in horrific war-torn places, and it would make much more impact pound for pound. It's amazing how much food you can buy for a starving person.
No, true. That said, an awful lot of that overseas aid budget wasn't going on causes. I think most British people, and we're one of the most generous nations in the world when it comes to causes, when there's an earthquake or a disaster in helping people, it's actually an awful lot of that money just goes in abject nonsense and is totally totally and utterly used by corrupt governments in war-torn situations for their own ends. But Grace, fascinating call. I really appreciate you taking the time to call in and covered an awful lot of ground as well. Thank you very much. Philip Ingram, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, huge amount in what Grace was saying there. The whole asylum process is in real disarray. The government needs to wake up and recognise that they have to grab this and deal with it quickly. Keir Starmer came in and he was sneering away, saying that as a former director of public prosecutions, he knew how to deal with terrorists, so he'd know how to deal with the organised criminals behind the gangs. And it's not working for him. And we saw the protests on the streets in Southport. People aren't recognising the tensions that are building up in this country, and they have to be dealt with. And the government should be taking a forward step like the German government is doing. We can't let this continue.
No, absolutely. Lots more calls to come. I really can't wait to hear more from you. Lots of top guests as well. Don't forget, of course, that 2-minute silence at midday to mark the fallen on the 80th anniversary of VE Day. 11:35 is the time. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Welcome back to the show. It's coming up to 11:37. Let's talk to Robert Bates now. He's Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control and joins us to talk about, well, all things asylum and migration. Very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much. I think we have to start with this staggering cost of the asylum hotels and accommodation, more than £4.5 million a day. It's more than triple the original estimate. £15 billion over 10 years is what they now think. They thought it would be about £5 billion over those 10 years from 2019. I think we can guarantee, given the scale of the migration issue that is ongoing and getting worse, 40% higher the Channel boat arrivals just this beginning, the first few months of this year than on previous years, that bill is going to go up and up and up. But why on earth are we spending so much money on this?
The whole thing is getting quite silly now. I think there's obviously an element of poor public procurement. We know that the government is not very good at actually buying services or goods when it needs to. But I think in general, the whole scale of the increase, in general, the asylum system cost us about £600 million a year in 2019. It's, forecast to hit 6.4 billion a year this year. So there's been a huge increase, a near tenfold increase in the amount we're having to spend. And that is because, as we know, those small boats have continued to come across the channel, but as well, the other loopholes that have been exploited by those looking to make spurious asylum claims, such as coming in on a study or work visa and then overstaying that and making an asylum claim, have increased as well. And the problem is that politicians have allowed this situation to drift. They've not looked at the loopholes. They've not looked at the root causes of why this situation is getting away from them. And it is getting away from them. Both the Tories and the Labour government had this problem really explode under their watch. And unfortunately, with the current plans that the Labour Party are putting out and what we might see in the white paper, there doesn't really see anything
No,
silver
nothing's
bullet.
going to change. They haven't smashed the gangs. They haven't dealt with all of this stuff. And they haven't. Well, again, there was a pledge from Keir Starmer ahead of the election. They were going to get rid of the hotels. No, we're not going to have people in hotels. Oh, no, what's your brilliant idea? Oh, we're going to put them all in private accommodation and pay landlords twice the local going rate and force British families out of those homes. But it's interesting, you say that it's not just the number of people arriving on the boats that's gone up and the number of people who are doing these spurious applications after their tourist or work visa or student visa has finished and go, oh, turns out it's too dangerous to go home. But also, I mean, the Tories basically, to all intents and purposes in the Home Office, stopped processing any of these claims. And even when they were processed, people just appeal. And pretty much no one actually left the country. So all the people who have arrived, more and more of them, are still here, and each one is an extra cost every day. Do you see that ending? Because it seems to me that even if we did actually start, and we have seen under Labour a speeding up of the processing, even if we cut the number of appeals that they could make, just ad infinitum, we're never going to be able to get rid of these people. And even if they go, well, you don't get asylum, but we'll give you indefinite leave to remain because you've been here so long and you've got kids here and a potted plant in the corner or whatever it is, that actually we'll still be paying for them. It just won't be under asylum bills. It'll just float off into the housing benefit bill and benefit bills generally. But they're still going to be here, still living amongst us, still not contributing, and we're still paying for them.
That's exactly right. And the system has been gummed up well and truly by ECHR appeals, immigration tribunals, legal aid and those left-wing lawyers that are very adept at just delaying the process and helping asylum seekers drag their heels. I think we need to realise that unless we are prepared to take dramatic action in reconfiguring our legal framework, then it would be very difficult to actually speed up the processing. Of course, as well, we also have this situation where thousands of individuals who have had their actual application for asylum rejected are able to stay in the country and claim a condition of destitution, and thus they also have access to that kind of supported accommodation as well. And then there are, of course, the other situations that we see in the ridiculous situations of asylum seekers just simply disappearing and not being kept track of. I think we need to realise that if we really want to solve this problem, then we have to kind of take harsh measures. And I know politicians don't like to hear that, and they like to kind of play the game as it is. But there's a real need for us to, increase our detention facilities. At the moment, we only have about 2,000 beds to remove individuals. And then we also need to really restrict the access that these individuals have to legal apparatus. That was something that a Tory bill, 2023 Illegal Migration Act, did go some way to try and stymie, but it didn't go far enough. I don't think we'll see anything in this Parliament, but you have to hope that on 29 the situation will be so dire.
And again, I think it's the same. Well, I'll come on to what Germany's announced yesterday in a moment. But, the government's announced things. But basically, it's Labour and the Tories drag kicking and screaming to deal with this issue because the British public have said enough is enough. And they've got an alternative party to vote for here in the UK. They've got Reform UK, and they have been voting for them, riding high. The latest polls looking at 29-30%. At that point, you're looking at a Reform majority party next time round, unless action is taken. But the key thing is, even when parties say they're going to do things, they largely don't do them. When Tories and Labour in power, getting migration back to tens of thousands, laughably. We had that back in 2010, didn't we? But even when they try, it seems to be so half-hearted. They get stymied all the way along and don't just go, we've got a big majority, we're changing the law, end of. Human rights lawyers can do one, and we're going. That's what the French do, it's what the Germans do. What do you make of this? You say this white paper, new immigration paper coming out next week, and leak about how they're going to be making, requirement on language skills for people arriving here. It's difficult to read between the lines of this. Is that just for people who are new arrivals, so having a much higher level of fluency in written and oral English than they currently, just the basic English now, already have? Or is this actually going to be backdated? So if you are here and you don't already have a citizenship or definite leave to remain, we're going to require you to learn English.
Yes, I think the Labour Party have actually identified that the ILR route is something that is going to cause us a lot of problems unless it's severely tightened. Of course, the Tories also put out a policy identifying that the period needs to be uplifted from 5 to 10 years before an individual can claim that. I don't know for
indefinite leave to remain, yeah.
Indefinite leave to remain, yes, sorry. I don't know for definite yet what I think their policies are on this. I think we'll have to wait and see the actual details. I'm sure there'll be loopholes and kind of little get-outs within there.
Of course there will be. Well, as one of our messages pointed out, it'll probably just involve us paying for those English lessons.
Well, that's it. And, we are far too tolerant of those that are arriving in this country without any real grasp. There are about 1 million people in this country that speak little or no English. And that's because our visa rules up until now have allowed certain routes to not really have any requirement at all. The dependent route in particular has no actual language requirements, really. And the results here, as we see, hundreds of millions in the NHS, local councils, DWP and all of that. So, and then the taxpayer gets saddled with the burden ultimately of those lessons that are required as well.
But that's not the norm in other countries. And again, we're always told, well, we have to be moral and good. Well, we're saying this bleeding heart whingers. They think that everything that happens in France and Germany is good. Everything that happens here is awful because we're all bigoted racists. I mean, that's genuinely what they view. And yet in France and Germany, they're much stricter on these things. There are no translation services for free there.
No, we've been far too timid. We've allowed basically the conversation to be guided by whether we look at the NHS and the access that people have to translators and interpretations there, by the trade unions and these kind of lobby groups that are in many cases state-funded as well, who are able to shriek Bloody Mary whenever we even suggest that someone must have an ability to speak English and shouldn't have their translation costs covered for them. It's something that's a sickness really in the way that the British state and apparatus.
Well, I mean, I know my rule when it comes to NHS. I don't think anyone should be allowed in the country on a tourist visa, work visa, or any other kind unless they've got insurance. And if you can't afford the insurance, and you're looking at 30, 40 quid or something for a few months. If you haven't got that money, I'm not sure you're going to be spending much here and be much use to us. I think it should be basic. I wouldn't dream of going abroad without having insurance myself. I think it's absolutely mad of people. If you can't afford it, I don't think you should be becoming a burden on other people. Let's talk about Germany, though, because this is interesting, this announcement from this, wet Tory Labour coalition, effectively, led by Friedrich Merz, got in on the second vote, basically to keep the AfD, the hard right, out, who've been making a lot of inroads on the immigration issue. They basically rescinded this 2015 law that basically rule that came in under Angela Merkel, which basically said anyone who turns up on the border, this was during the Syrian civil war, anyone undocumented, no proof, anything, can turn up and claim asylum. Not a problem. 3 million people later, German people, funnily enough, not so happy about that. It's been an absolute terrible, terrible experiment and a disaster for the German people. They basically changed that and said the default should be, no, you're not coming. If you're undocumented, unless you've got really obvious evidence that you're a genuine asylum seeker, which we know most of these people do not have, you are not coming into Germany. Do you think this is the beginning of the end of the madness?
Well, we've seen similar gestures made by certain kind of Central Europe and Western European governments previously. I can't quite tell at this point whether it is just kind of electoral posturing and kind of hardline talk. I think obviously when you're a member of the European superstate, you have certain obligations, and there's the need to kind of collaborate on that intergovernmental level that perhaps binds the hands a bit more of governments. I imagine there would be pushback from other countries affected. The reason we need to recognise that working with Europe, though, is not in our interest is because if they are taking these measures and they are making those appeals to their domestic audiences, if we were to get involved in some kind of pan-European asylum system or cooperate immigration, we'd effectively become a dumping ground. If you think about Keir Starmer and his sycophancy towards Brussels and European capitals, the idea that he'd go in there and not be an absolute pushover and allow us to end up taking a bigger share of Europe's problem is for the birds. So we have to take them at their value. We have to listen to what they say and think if this is the direction that they're heading to in Europe, the idea that we could cooperate with them with our weak government and end up not being absolutely walked over is laughable.
Very good point. Robert Bates, Research Director of the Centre for Migration Control. Philip Ingram?
Yeah, again, talking complete sense. The government needs to start to take ownership of some of the issues that there are around, and they're just not doing it.
I just find it extraordinary, government after government saying we can't do anything about it. But then you shouldn't be in government.
Well, exactly.
You absolutely should. I'm pretty sure that where there's a will, there is a way. You locked us in our homes for 23 hours a day for months on end when there's not. You can have the powers if you want them.
Yeah. If the government can't do anything about it, who can? They're there to do things.
Otherwise, you can deliver or go home.
Exactly.
11:48 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be talking about prospect of an interest rate cut for the Bank of England at midday, and also coming up, of course, to that 2-minute silence at midday to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day today. This is Talk.
finding unfair, but not as well as British citizens. They should have to be able to provide proof of medical insurance. But what they shouldn't be is less expensive to hire than the native.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you very much indeed for joining us at 11:51 as we approach that 2-minute silence at midday. We'll be marking that here on VE Day. I hope you'll all join us in marking those 2 minutes to remember the fallen heroes that got us to where we are today. Right now, though, let's talk about whether or not we'll be praising the Bank of England just around that time when they announced their latest decision on interest rates. Let's talk to Julian Jessup. He's an independent economist. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. So all the expectations seem to be that we're going to get another small quarter-point cut from 4.5% to 4.25% at midday?
Yes, that's right. And I think we'll definitely get a cut of at least a quarter point. Personally, I'd vote for a half-point cut, but I suspect I would be in a minority. Yeah. But in addition to the rate announcement, we're also going to get the latest set of Bank of England forecasts, which I think are going to be good news as well. I think they'll probably nudge up their expectations for growth this year and lower their expectations for inflation, particularly because global energy prices have been lower than they expected. So in a sense, it's sort of a triple boost to the economy, lower interest rates, a bit more optimism about growth.
And of course, the Monetary Policy Committee would have met yesterday before the news that's trickled out about this prospect of in a few hours' time of a US-UK trade deal.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the announcement is today, but the decision was actually made yesterday. So they won't have known about the trade deal, though frankly, I suspect that was probably anticipated. There's been speculation for some time that the US and the UK would agree to lower some of the highest tariffs that have been imposed, particularly on cars and on steel. Yeah. So it's not entirely a surprise. I still think the Bank of England will be, flagging up the downside risks to growth later this year if the global trade war does continue. Yeah. And even after the US-UK trade deal is confirmed, we're still going to have probably higher tariffs than we did before Trump was elected. So I don't think we can quite sound the all clear there. No. But again, that's a downside risk to the economy that I think is probably less severe now than it was, say, a month or two ago.
And indeed, we're also competing with everyone else on similar tariff or higher tariff levels as well, depending on how that all works out. There's also a prediction that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is going to miss her fiscal rules. Now, again, can you just explain what these fiscal rules are? And are they rules that are self-imposed or do they actually matter?
Well, you're right. This is a prediction from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, which is sort of a fairly well-respected think tank. And they're suggesting that the government will borrow something like 57 billion more in 5 years' time than is allowed under the fiscal rule.
Is that in total or a year?
In that year.
In that, okay. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's a massive overshoot. Now, the problem there is the fiscal rule is a very strict one. Basically, the government has to balance day-to-day spending on things like wages and salaries in the public sector with tax revenues. Now, I personally think that's a very sensible target, but it does mean that the numbers are very sensitive to what you assume about things like growth and inflation and interest.
And everything was predicated on we're going to have all this amazing growth, which we simply haven't seen.
Yes, and that's where you can get into a sort of vicious spiral, or what some people call a doom loop, because the way that Rachel Reeves has approached this problem is that if she thinks she's going to miss her fiscal rules, she closes the gap by raising taxes. Now, that might work on paper, but in practice, of course, if all that does is slows the economy and hampers growth, you end up with actually a weaker economy and worse public finances than you would otherwise have done.
And that's obviously, it's fascinating. It's been the instinct for a lot of Labour MPs reacting to the local election trouncing of both Labour and the Tories by Reform UK last week. Oh, well, you should raise more taxes, spend more on public services, do this or that. But of course, if there's that extra borrowing, you could raise taxes, but we wouldn't see a penny of it because it's all going out in interest on those extra debts, isn't it?
And also, there's only a limited number of taxes that you could raise and realistically expect to get any additional money in. I know there's a lot of talk about raising taxes more on the rich, but it's not as if the rich don't pay taxes already.
And this is one of the most frustrating things. Is this idea of these mythical people who are just not paying a single penny when in fact they're paying 30% of all income tax in this country, the richest.
And also, like it or not, rich people tend to have more choices than the rest of us. So they have the choice about whether or not to expand or set up a business or simply move overseas.
And we have seen a massive exodus of millionaires, haven't we, from London in particular. Again, that will have an impact on the future dynamism of our country. And indeed, our youngest, brightest and best on whether they feel they want to stay here or, I mean, all these people going off to Dubai, because of the taxes here. In terms of the Indian trade deal, where are you on this issue on terms of the national insurance sort of being paid for 3 years by Indian workers coming over from India back in India as opposed to here in the UK and vice versa for Brits?
Well, I'm in the unusual position here of 100% supporting the Labour government on this. And therefore disagreeing with a lot of people that normally I regard as allies. But I think the points about national insurance are widely misunderstood. The exemption, well, there is already an exemption for most foreign workers.
For a year, anyway.
Up to a year. So that's being extended rather than something that's new. But also, rather than providing a sort of competitive advantage to Indian workers, it's removing a disadvantage because at the moment, if you employ an Indian worker, you basically have to pay tax twice. You have to pay social security contributions in the UK and social security contributions in India as well. So all this change is doing is actually just creating a level playing field for British and Indian workers. And in any event, it only apply to a pretty small number of workers who are typically highly skilled professionals.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of changed our view on this a lot yesterday, talking to people who are rather more knowledgeable about this than I think most of us are in terms of those trade deals. Julian Jessup, thank you very much indeed. We'll get that Bank of England decision very, very soon. Independent economist Julian Jessup, appreciate that. Philip Ingram, I mean, a lot of people, every month waiting on that interest rate decision, people coming off fixed rate mortgages. I mean, there was a time when it was genuinely scary for an awful lot of people. Do you think we're getting back to sort of more normalcy on that and the inflation coming down? But are we seeing anything that resembles the sort of growth that we want to see?
Well, we're not seeing the growth that we want to see, and the whole of the government spending plans were based on a 2% or greater growth, and the statistics are showing we're not going to get anywhere near that during the time that this government's in. So they set the target and they're failing to achieve it. Interest rates coming down will be good for those that are hoping that mortgage rates will come down. The mortgage rates never seem to come down as fast as the interest rates
Funny
do.
that, yeah, indeed.
But if you're the other side where you're saving, the savings rates tend to come down quicker than anything else.
Funny that. They always make money. That's why the banks have got those big shiny buildings with all the marble. That's on the chandeliers. That's the giveaway.
There are winners and losers, but
absolutely.
It's the wider policies on business that are just stopping the growth.
Absolutely. Look, we're coming up in just a couple of moments to the midday 2-minute silence to mark our fallen heroes, to stand in silence for just a moment to thank those who lost their lives, who made the ultimate sacrifice in the Second World War. VE Day, 80th anniversary today. Just talk a bit again, just how significant this day is, especially as an ex-military man yourself, wearing your proud medals.
It's hugely significant. It's the last time as a country we were at total war, where everything was focused on it.
And the whole country,
the whole country, everyone came together. It was the one thing that put us all together, and not just in the UK, but across Europe and across the world. And we will never be in that position again, I hope, ever. The trouble is, there's a lot going on around the world, and there's a very real danger we could be.
I would never say never on that. We've got war in Europe right now, in Ukraine.
Never.
That is the real concern. And again, understanding the significance of that and understanding the importance of the freedoms that those men fought for and so many back at home sacrificed for as well. 80 years ago, celebrations broke out around the UK at the news that war in Europe was finally over. Winston Churchill, addressing the nation and indeed the empire, stressed that conflict still raged in Asia, where Japan had not yet surrendered. But there would be a brief period of rejoicing, and rejoicing there was. So as we approach 12 o'clock, it's time to mark 2 minutes of silence to commemorate VE Day.
80th anniversary of VE Day. A service of Thanksgiving is currently underway at Westminster Abbey, where the King and Queen are in attendance. Bells will be rung in churches and cathedrals across the country later as other services take place. The Prime Minister spoke earlier about the importance of today's anniversary.
A celebration of defiance, of sacrifice, the courage of that lion-hearted generation, the greatest victory in the history of this great nation.
President Trump appears to have confirmed the announcement of a UK-US trade deal this afternoon. In a post on his Truth Social platform, he said it should be a big and exciting day for both countries. We're expecting an announcement in the Commons later. John Alty is the UK's former Director General for Trade Policy.
It would be amazing if there weren't good news for cars and possibly steel, because that's been the main pain point so far. But what about pharmaceuticals, where there is a threat of future tariffs? What about the film industry?
We're about to find out from the Bank of England if interest rates will be cut. It looks as though the cost of borrowing will fall by 0.25% to 4.25%. And cardinals have failed to elect a new pope during votes in the Sistine Chapel this morning. Black smoke's poured from the famous chimney, indicating they're yet to agree. That's the latest. I'm Divya Kohli.
Talk across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I don't know about you, those 2 minutes silence just... it always gives you a moment, doesn't it? It really just, quite the point of them is to make you think, to stand in silence, to sit in silence, and to just have those moments and remember those fallen heroes. And I don't think we can ever do enough to show our gratitude to those who sacrificed in the many wars that have been fought, but particularly the Second World War. We're marking the end of that war in Europe, VE Day, Victory in Europe Day today. There's 2 minutes silence, so many services of remembrance, so many events happening today. Great that you joined us for that, and I'm sure you felt just the same feelings of incredible patriotic pride and both sadness and gratitude all at the same time. So thank you for joining us for that. Lots to talk about today, and whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, as I say, it's great to have your company. Just to give you the latest news coming out of the Bank of England, they have indeed cut the base rate from 4.5% to 4.25%. So always good news for anyone with a mortgage. So fingers crossed to everybody. And indeed, I was thinking an awful lot of business owners with a lot of debt still carrying over from lockdown and the like as well. So that is certainly good news, as was expected. Also, in about 3 hours' time, we're getting a press conference from Donald Trump in the Oval Office. We're expecting a statement from Keir Starmer as well about a new trade deal between the UK and the US. It's the first signed by the White House since President Trump announced Liberation Day, as he rather bizarrely called it, imposing global tariffs earlier this year. We'll talk more about that. Also, under the latest immigration news, all migrants will have to learn a higher standard of English under Keir Starmer's immigration reforms as part of a tougher plan to ensure that they integrate in society. But do you believe it'll actually happen? Really? Meanwhile, a shocking report from the National Audit Office, the number crunchers in terms of government spending, has revealed that £4.5 million a day of taxpayers' money is being wasted on funding hotels and other accommodations for asylum seekers. It is going to cost a whopping £15 billion for the 10 years to 2029. But that's 3 times what they thought it would be just 6 years ago. It's all gone up massively since then. We ain't got rid of any of these people pretty much since then. So it's just going to keep going up and up. Plus, we're also going to be talking about the working class Labour voters who've been frozen out of the party by the woke thought police. That's what Labour peer and founder of the socially conservative Blue Labour movement, Lord Glassman, has had to say. He's warned the party that creating a hostile environment where it's impossible for ordinary people to speak their minds will not reap those votes come 2029. And he's right about that, is he not? We'll talk about that with the Labour representative. Lots more to come. Delighted to say, very proud to say that Philip Ingram MBE joins us still today, former senior military intelligence officer, still wearing his medals. I won't embarrass him by making him talk through what they're all for. They've been glinting at me throughout the show. It was interesting watching your face through that. You've been you're not an armchair general like me. You've been through an actual war. You've lost comrades in arms. You understand the reality of war. You also been very open about how you suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of what you've been through and experienced, seen and felt. What were your thoughts as we marked that 2-minute silence?
Oh, mixed thoughts going through. It's a sense of pride of what we achieved during the Second World War, but it's a very poignant feeling. A sense of awe as to what the country had gone through, and feeling a sense of loss. And I was remembering, as I was going through that, the repatriation ceremonies in Iraq, watching the bodies of those that had been killed loaded onto the back of aircraft before being flown home. And it just gets you in the centre of your stomach. And
it really does.
Really does.
It really, really does. Well, we've been talking earlier about the need to sort of make sure our young people understand the sacrifice and what they achieved and why our country and our values are worth fighting for. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the 80th anniversary of VE Day, your thoughts and memories on this day, whether it's of being a child and marking those days, what your family did, what your fathers, grandfathers did in the war, your mum too, back on the home front, but also your thoughts on whether this was a country worth fighting for today, because I absolutely believe it is, but we're telling so many of our young people that it isn't. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, text the word talk in your message to 87222, get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate, text cost £1, standard network rate message. Also your responses, lots of them coming in about taxpayers spending more than £4 million a day on hotels for asylum seekers. The government is set to demand also all migrants speak fluent English to stay in Britain and come to Britain. Do you believe they'll ever tackle the cost of the migrants and their asylum hotels? Do you think they'll ever really tackle the issue of people simply not integrating but coming to this country and living here for years, staying here forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Same number, 0344 499 1000. Delighted to welcome to the show to talk actually about all of these topics. Actually, it's our next guest, Lord Craig McKinley, is a Conservative peer who joins us, I think, fresh from a service that you attended this morning marking VE Day, Craig.
Yeah, indeed. Just we had a 2-minute silence in, I believe, both chambers of Parliament, and I wanted to join the one in the Lords before getting on your super show, as ever.
Absolutely, I would absolutely always put that as far more important a job to do that. I'd love to hear your thoughts though, just on the issue of the 80th anniversary of VE Day. And one of the things that you and I have often talked about on this show is about a lot of the big issues. I think you've been on the right side of pretty much every issue in recent political years. But so many of our young people, poll after poll, say they don't think our country's worth fighting for. They wouldn't be willing to die for it. We've got a war in Europe right now in Ukraine. People go, it's not our problem. What are your thoughts in terms of the sacrifices made up to 80 years ago and what that means for us today?
Well, I think the sad thing is that you and I know, and most people in the country know, that this country has very good values. It has a very proud history. It did the right things at the right times in various parts of this world, notably in the Second World War that we're celebrating today, to actually get rid of absolute evil and tyranny. And we gave the ultimate sacrifice. Many died, millions died in that campaign. And also they do similar in Russia today. They'll be doing theirs tomorrow through some dint of history. But they'll be reflecting on the losses to get rid of Nazism. But there are too many people in this country that don't want to teach those values. Yeah. We're telling our children that Britain's past is somehow evil and nasty and colonial, and it's got more that we should be ashamed of than proud of. Well, I never subscribe to that. Yeah. We have got 99.9% of things that this country has done we should be very, very proud of. Liberating the world, introducing democracy, having the rule of law, all of those foundations.
Ending slavery, a small point
well,
worth
exactly.
making.
I mean, we
even the things we did bad, we were the only empire to end them.
It cost Britain such a huge percentage of our GDP at the time, and the lives of many Royal Naval, seamen at the time, to actually rid the world of slavery. And yet, we don't point fingers at the potentates of West Africa at the time, who actually gave up their own citizens for slavery. Yeah. we seem to want to point the gun at ourselves and say we were responsible for it all, and we've got to atone for that. Well, I say no, we don't. We have to celebrate the fact that Britain did its bit to rid the world of slavery, and we should be proud of that as well. So we need a big education change, in my view. But then I've been saying this since sort of the 1980s. What are they teaching our children? So it's
well, mostly climate change propaganda and pro-Palestinian propaganda, as far as I can tell.
I did a speech at a school for 17, 18-year-olds just recently on the whole issue of climate change. I actually came away very well and a little surprised afterwards. But from some of the nature of the questions that were put, it was very obvious what they'd been put into their heads over a number of years. And that would be generally across the whole woke agenda. Let's not be frightened, fearful or embarrassed about our past. Let's put the flag up and say we've got an awful lot to be very proud of. And if most of the world were to ape what we do in terms of equality, parliamentary sovereignty, rule of law and all of those other good things, I think we could see that the world would be a far finer place.
And indeed, I'll tell you what would also be interesting is we wouldn't have I would say millions of people basically desperate to come to our country. That's the point in things that people criticise our country. Yeah, but the funny thing is people are trying to come here, not on balance, trying to leave here. And that's one of the giveaways, isn't it? Let's talk about migration stories. The announcement today from the government, well, not announcement, a leak. It's always given out by the government ahead of next week in a white paper on immigration, which says that there'll be a requirement on arrivals to this country, migrants, to speak more fluent English and be able to write more fluent English, not just basic sort of GCSE level communication, but at a higher standard. Do you think that A, they will actually be able to enforce that, and B, that they will, and C, what they're going to do about all the many hundreds of thousands of people who are already here who don't speak English and have no intention of learning it, but apparently are a great benefit to our culture and our society and our economy?
Well, yeah, again, this is a flag raiser on the back of some unpleasant election results, shall we say, last week. So I'm not at all surprised to hear it. A lot of people decided to vote Reform last week because they see Conservative, that we haven't atoned properly for some of the failures on immigration that we clearly did. And they can't see the Labour Party doing anything different, so they voted elsewhere, thinking that that will be the salvation. It probably won't be, but let's put that aside at the moment. So lo and behold, Labour are saying things that if we'd said such a thing in government, they would probably have got an urgent question through the House of Commons about how appallingly dog whistle that type of policy is. But you're quite right, saying words and actually doing something are two very remarkable things. Now, I always reflect on the fact, within the shadow of the City of London, one of the wealthiest, most money-generating parts of Europe, within the shadow of that is a huge Bangladeshi community in the East End. And there were some figures I saw recently. There was a good I think up to 30% of the Bangladeshi population there did not speak English.
Well, I did my local newspaper training on the East London Advertiser. I can pretty much always see where the offices were. And that was an issue. I love that part of the world. I really do. I was working there. I was working in there. But there's no doubt at all that was a massive issue then. It's a much bigger issue now. People who simply cannot integrate.
When you've got those facts, not only in the East End of London, but in many of our bigger towns and cities, you have to say, is this an integrated Britain at peace with itself? And I'm not sure that it is.
It's not. But also diversity is our strength. But people actually are not mixing and integrating even within different ethnic minorities and religious communities and nationalities. I mean, we've also got this extraordinary story today about from the National Audit Office showing that the Home Office's original estimate of the overall bill for asylum seeker accommodation, hotels and private flats over a 10-year period from 2019 to 2029, they thought it was going to be about £5 billion. Well, sorry, less than that, £4.5 billion. Turns out it's going to be over 15 billion, so more than tripling, because we had a huge number of new arrivals. And of course, we've now got 110,000 people. That's just last December. Good tens of thousands since then have arrived, who are just sitting on that system, not being processed, not being deported, not contributing. The figure is going up and up. I'm no doubt at all by 2029 that £15 billion figure will be far higher. What is the solution, Craig?
Well, I think we've got a lot of fiddling of figures going on here. There are 38,000 migrants seeking status in hotels. Now, hotels are expensive, £100 a day at least. You've then got about another 70,000 in accommodation. Now, there was a big fanfare last week that Serco, one of those companies that's been appointed by the government, are being set out to go and find lots more properties so that we can get people out of hotels. Now, that would be a sleight of hand. So the government will be able to say, oh, well, we're not spending so much on hotels, but won't then tell you how much we're spending on normal rented accommodation. Now, I can but guess that Serco will be offering some very, very good deals for landlords.
We understand they're often offering twice the local market rent.
Right. Guaranteed for 5 years, any repairs all done and dusted. So we're now going to crowd out existing Brits from the rental market. But where are we going with all this? I can guarantee these prices will be higher. I would like to see, and I might actually set the task, put some parliamentary questions down. How much are equivalent countries like France and Germany spending on similar accommodation? Because you can't help but think, why are the pull factors so strong in getting people to the UK? I know people often say, oh, well, France, Germany have got more, but we are getting an increasing number. So no matter how much Yvette Cooper says we're going to smash the gangs, somebody doesn't seem to be listening because they're still coming.
They didn't get the memo. Well, I mean, again, we know that in Calais they're intense. That's the giveaway.
Well, this is the big thing. Are we being a little too generous? I mean, what's not to like? If it's hot in the summer in a hotel, you'll have air conditioning. If it's cold in the winter, you'll have heating, and you'll have 3 square meals a day, possibly for a year or two. For the sake of paying a people trafficker, what, €7,000?
I think it's gone down lately. The market, the one thing that organised criminal gangs, they've got a great little market going.
Yes, they've already got a free market going rather better than our economy ourselves in many factors. But I'd be interested to know, is this one of the main reasons that we've got a pull factor into the UK? The other area that is, we're now starting to pull the sheets back on it a little, is what is happening in the underground economy. Are there so many cash jobs in the UK? Is there fiddles going on in the delivery market, where you can probably claim to be your uncle's brother, and you simply get yourself a motorbike and you're, hey presto, a delivery driver overnight? Are all of these things going on in the UK? And I think I can guess the answer. It's probably yes, that we're not seeing as a feature in, say, France and Germany, and hence the pull factor to the UK of good accommodation, underground jobs, and the chance of refugee status after a couple of years. Is this a big pull factor in itself? And shouldn't we, rather than mess around with can you speak English or not, let's get to the root of the problem and see why people are coming here.
Absolutely. And again, you can do anything you want, but if you don't get rid of the pull factor, it's not going to change. Just finally, can I ask you about, you were keen Brexiteer as well, this possibility of a US trade deal? We're told at 3 o'clock this afternoon UK time Donald Trump's going to announce. He says it's a big trade deal, it's a big and exciting day, and it's for a big and respected country. Apparently that's little old us. We had that Indian trade deal as well. On Tuesday there's some big fusses about the national insurance, but largely a financial benefit to this country to have a trade deal with one of the biggest economies in the world and a growing economy. What are your hopes for the US trade deal? And of course, do you think anyone will actually acknowledge in government, this being a full-on Ramona government, that actually we're only able to do this because of that little old thing called Brexit?
Well, there's lots of these going on. We had CPTPP, great deal, opening up 500 million people around the world, growing economies. India one. I'm fully in favour of free trade deals wherever they arise. I'm one of those right-of-centre conservatives that would say we should have no global tariffs. I mean, that is my ideal. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to what the structure of the US trade deal. We wouldn't have been able to do any one of these had we remained in the EU, where every single trade deal got bogged down in agriculture deals that France and other agricultural countries in Europe simply would not go along with. So, yeah, we have this fleet of foot ability to do trade deals around the world. The US is actually our biggest individual trade partner, and we are reciprocation, the biggest investors in each other's economies. So to make any of that easier, I think is a good thing. I mean, I always ask people, those who were Remainers, I said, if you had the opportunity of doing a commercial contract with an American company or an Australian company or a Bulgarian company, which one would you be most comfortable doing business with? Because the law is similar. We're based on a common law framework. This is a natural progression of the English-speaking world. And I sort of put India under that umbrella still. It was quite remarkable yesterday. You had one of the foreign ministers talking about the conflict with Pakistan, speaking in superb English. about what was going on. So I think the English-speaking world, we denigrate it, we try and sort of ignore that it exists, but it has great power because
that's soft power, absolutely. So good to talk to you. Always great to get your thoughts on everything. Lord McKinley, Craig McKinley of Conservative Peer, thank you very much indeed for joining us. 12:22 is the time. Philip Ingram, I'm just going to leave that free. What do you want to come back in on?
Well, you're talking about the immigration and everything else. It's getting rid of the pull factors, but there also needs to be a major deterrent put in there. And I've mentioned Rwanda a few times, and yes, it was flawed because of the volume that's going through. But
there's only going to be a couple of hundred. It needs to be everybody.
There needs to be some form of deterrent in there. The new head of the border agency that's dealing with them had turned around himself and said
he literally said within a few weeks of taking office, yeah, this isn't going to work.
Exactly, but there's nothing, absolutely nothing coming out of government, and they need to recognise that that's why the elections have gone the way they are, and that's why we're seeing turquoise smoke coming out of the chimney in Parliament.
There's a great meme going around, isn't there,
exactly.
of the turquoise, the reform-coloured colours coming out of the Vatican
it's the
chimney.
Great Reformation.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. This is why we get him in. Not just the glinting medals. 12:23 is the time. We're going to take a quick break, then we're going to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts on all of the topics we are talking about, whether it's VE Day, whether it's immigration issues, whether it is the trade deal. What are you expecting to hear? Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The sort of people that we've had standing for us up and down the country, by and large, are talented, able, driven people who desperately want best for their country. Now, as I say, there will be mistakes made. Some people might find the workload is huge. Though I've never seen that many councillors who are hospitalised through overwork. Yeah. But I think that there is that drive and that ambition is there, and there is a can-do attitude.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you so much for joining me. 12:25 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Philip Ingram is still with me as well with his glinting medals on VE Day, the 80th anniversary, of course. You're getting in touch on lots of different topics we're talking about today. Let's talk just right now, though, about the 80 years since VE Day. I'm asking for your thoughts and memories. A lot of you have been getting in touch on the lines on Talk 87222 on text and on X at talkTV. Richard says, most of us are thankful to this day, can only imagine what it was like through written or spoken accounts. My granddad happened to be taking part in operations in Italy on this day. It's a million miles from the country we now find ourselves in. Adam says, if it wasn't for their sacrifice, we wouldn't have the freedoms of today. And David says, respect to our fallen who gave their lives. All the luxuries we have today are because of their sacrifices. Thank you. And that is so true, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Graham says, my granddad, a quiet and gentle man who served and who did his part as needed. I thank him and others for what they endured. My aim before I go is to not see all of that mean nothing. Stephen says, I think about all those brave people who fought against tyranny to keep this country free. It reminds me of the brave men and women in Ukraine. Yeah, exactly. And Damien says, my grandparents both served during the war. I thank them for their service today and always. I fear the youth of today don't have the same respect. It's interesting, Philip, and Craig McKinley touching on that as well.
Yes, I hear a lot of people criticising the youth of today, and
it's the teachers. It's not the young people. They can't help what they're being taught.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, I think actually, if push came to shove, the youth of today would stand up, and I think there's a lot of woke commentators who are turning around to try and suggest that they won't. The reality is they would if necessary. 1 in 8
of them don't even go to work because they've all got anxiety or something. I mean, again, you know, you think what our forefathers went through dealing with them were not just those at the front, not just those in the First World War trenches and fighting the battlefields in France and the daring do of D-Day and you name it, and the sacrifices, the lives people had to live, the rationing, the limit on your freedoms, and that people had to endure, and the privation people had, deprivation they had for so many years. Bearing in mind that rationing was still going on into the 50s, wasn't it? People today don't have a clue, so many young people, about what people went through. When they talk about, oh, I've got a hard life, give over. Give over. We are so lucky. Every single day you should wake up in this country and say, I want to thank my lucky stars I've been born here.
Yeah. Maybe we should have a national month where people are only allowed to eat and live on a ration level of...
I tell you what, the nation would be a lot healthier.
It would be.
A lot healthier.
That would help
and that's the reason my parents' generation have all lived so long, is because the rationing. So people who actually got a decent food for the first time, and people weren't able to, you know, no obesity then, apart from Winston Churchill, who obviously definitely got more than his fair share.
Of port.
Let's get some of your messages coming in about migration and just this absurd amount of money that's being spent, more than £4 million a day on hotels and other accommodation for asylum seekers. It's gone up. It's trebled since the predictions from 2019. George says, talk about how to process the asylum procedure quicker. Would it not be easier just to close the borders? If you arrive in an airport with no papers, they send you back. Exactly. I don't understand. You can't get in any other country like that. They'll never be deported, says Chris, because they love chicken nuggets here in the UK. I mean, I'm never going to forget that. On my Albanian guy whose kid apparently wouldn't eat chicken nuggets in Albania. It's like, how do you know? If you're so fearful of Albania, your kid's surely never been there and never tasted them. And by the way, they taste the same everywhere. Steve says, by the way, Fiji kid better. Steve says, it doesn't matter if they can speak multi-languages. If they are here illegally, they should not be allowed to stay. End of argument. Here. Jazz says, just stop paying for translators, then they'll have to learn. They won't go without their benefits or freebies, will they? And Christian says, so they'll send them back if they can't speak English. Absolute rubbish. Nothing but playing to the crowd. Yeah, I agree. I just don't think they'll do anything about it. Let's go to Mark. He's on the line in Lincolnshire. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Good afternoon to you, Mark.
Hi, Julia Midoki, all right?
Oh, I love it when you call me that. I love it. Very well. All the better for chatting to you. What do you want to say, my darling?
Well, a couple of things, because you've just been talking about the VE thing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to relay very briefly my story, because I don't actually know a vast amount at all anyway.
Yeah.
My grandfather, the only thing, this is on my dad's side, I only had two alive when I was born. Grandfather on my dad's side and grandmother on my mum's side. Grandmother on my mum's side, she was making shells in a factory, that I know. Grandfather on my dad's side never spoke about the war. He only ever spoke to me once about it, and that was when he first turned up in India, and the amazement he had at seeing elephants.
Yeah, can you imagine?
The wonder even then when he was telling me was quite amazing. Just the wonder he had in his eyes then. But he wouldn't speak about the war at all. It was only long after he'd passed away, and my dad had only found stuff out through his mum, who obviously wasn't around when I was alive, or, since I've been alive. And apparently the reason he never spoke about it was because he ended up as a Japanese prisoner of war.
Oh my goodness, and we know what they went through. Good Lord.
Yeah. He used to suffer from, night terrors and bedwetting from time to time, this kind of thing.
And never spoke. That generation, the men, you can't speak about it. That was seen as a weakness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the thought of that, what he went through, and what he would have seen, his friends go through as well. Yeah. That always kind of brings a lump in my throat.
Oh, I'm not even related to him, and I feel that way, and I'm sure our audience do too. And again, we just have to thank every single one of those men and women who went through that. Mark, thank you for that. Look, I know you wanted to also talk about the migration issue. What do you want to say on that?
It's about the English translation stuff. Yeah. I really can't see why on earth we allow people into the country that have no basic grasp, or at the very least, essentially not allowing them within the community until they can speak, a basic level of English. Because even if you want to be really liberal about these people, which I'm not, I want them all deported.
Who's them? When you say them all, who do you mean?
Illegal immigrants, really.
Yeah. Well, no, but we're talking about visas that are given out to people, particularly dependents, who are completely legally here. Their other half's working, but they don't speak English.
Yeah, and they shouldn't be here. Because the simple point I would make about it, as I say, even if you want to be liberal about this stuff, how can they convey if they need help? Yeah. They can't.
Well, you can't communicate with your neighbours. You can't, be a part of the community. You pretty much can't get a job.
100%. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of ringing 111, but the very first thing you're asked when you ring 111 is, do you need a translator? Now, this is in English, and that kind of has me scratching my head, and I'm thinking, well, if they don't speak English, how are they going to know to be asked to press 1 if they need a translator?
You do make a fair point. I mean, yeah. And again, people say, well, what, do you want people to die? No, but I just don't know if it's our responsibility.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I don't feel it's our responsibility. If you're making a conscious decision to travel to a country for whatever your reason, then it's incumbent on you to actually have some basic understanding. I mean, as you were saying earlier, if I go on holiday somewhere, that's one thing. I'm going to be there for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the idea would be, as you were saying earlier, Julia, the people I'm going to be interacting with that are local are probably going to have some level of English anyway. Yeah. But if I was going to move to a country, I wouldn't even dream of moving to a country if I couldn't communicate with the people there.
No, exactly.
It's like if you're going to move to Germany or somewhere like that.
Absolutely.
You don't speak any German.
But again, also the idea that people, we've seen people who arrived in Germany, 3 million people since 2015, 1 million arrived that year. By all accounts, most of those people are still unemployed. Because they haven't learned German. I mean, it's just utterly bizarre. But again, as someone pointed out earlier, I thought the reason the big pull factor of this country for migrants was because they all got someone here and they all speak English as their second language. Well, turns out not. But there we are. Really good call, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark's in Lincolnshire. I have to say, Philip Ingram, if you talk about the callers, that we call a call centre, do you need a translator? I normally need a translator trying to deal with someone at my local council, because virtually everybody, it seems to me, who answers the phones now is someone who speaks with a very strong foreign accent. But there's someone in this country, and I'm like, I can't understand a word people are saying. You say, I don't mean to be rude. I mean, very polite. But could you speak more slowly? Me saying that of all people. Could you put me onto somebody else? I can't understand you. And I don't mean to be rude, but just you're no use to me if you're answering the phone and I can't understand you.
And the same when you get outsourced call centres in different countries around the world. But I think one of the things the government could do is, if people are coming in legally and you're giving them a visa to come in, it should be a temporary visa, and it is only made a longer visa if you are proved to be a net contributor to society.
Yeah, and you have to be earning a very good whack, and everyone in your family needs to speak English.
But that's economic, and that's social as well. So you have to be a social net contributor, and within that there's language tests. If you're not, your visa isn't renewed.
They will never do it. They like the cheap labour too much, and they're not impacted by it, the people who make the decisions. So, by the way, all the political parties, they get donations from the big businesses who make the money from the cheap labour. There you go. 12:35 is the time. Thank you very much indeed for that. More from Philip Ingram. In a few moments, we're actually going to hear from historian Elliot Wilson about the significance of VE Day's 80th anniversary. Right now, though, it's a chance to find out how you could be with the opportunity of winning a weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football. Yes, the Champions League final. Commiserations to Arsenal fans for last night. We are also putting $5,000 in your pocket to spend however you want. Have a listen.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive $5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win that VIP trip, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May, 11 p.m. A text will cost you £2 plus one standard network rate message. You must have bill payer's permission. Or you can just send your name and number by post to Champions League Final Comp, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP. It must arrive by 5 p.m. on May the 21st.
Very good luck to you all on that. Don't miss out on that incredible giveaway from our colleagues just down the corridor at TalkSport. Good luck. We'll take a quick break. Up next, we're going to be talking more about V-Day. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. 12:38 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and this is Talk. Philip Ingram, MBE, is still with me with his glinting medals as a former senior military intelligence officer and serving soldier. Delighted to be welcome to the show again. Also, historian and writer Elliot Wilson to join us to talk about the VE Day commemorations, 80 years on today. Very good afternoon to you, Elliot.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, let's talk us through the significance of today, because we were pointing out ahead of the 2-minute silence, Winston Churchill going on the radio announcing that there had been this unconditional surrender by the Germans, but also pointing out in a lengthy radio address to the nation and the empire that fighting continued in Asia, and the victory in Japan would not come for a few months, and of course after the nuclear weapons were dispatched as well. How significant was what happened 80 years ago today?
Well, it was hugely significant in that, the war for us anyway had started in Europe. Obviously, there had been conflict in China before that, but it had started in Europe, and we had, to an extent, won what we needed to do. We defeated Germany, and we defeated them completely. And there had been times, back in 1940, 41, even into 1942, when that looked like it genuinely might not happen. Yeah. The war was not a done deal by any means. And certainly before the Americans came in at the end of 1941, there were a lot of people who had said that, this was not going to work, that we had to find some way out of the conflict, which was less than winning. So, once we declared that we would only accept unconditional surrender, we'd put ourselves in for the hard yards. And by May 1945, thank God it had worked and Germany had collapsed.
Well, again, it's almost impossible to comprehend, although many novelists and filmmakers have tried over the decades to what life would be like for us and the whole of Europe if we had not won.
It's one of those things where it really is incredibly stark. There isn't much nuance about it. We know that the Nazi regime was barbaric beyond imagination. We know what it did to not only the Jewish population, but also, the Roma population and other minorities. We know what occupied countries went through, what France went through, what the Netherlands and Belgium went through. And I'm not one of these people who thinks that British people would have been completely different. I think we would have suffered much the same fate. We would have largely had to go along with it because it was coercion. You had a military dictatorship which could make you do what it wanted
Well,
you.
people like to think, oh no, we'd be different, but the evidence is very clear that in these sort of regimes under this threat, it largely isn't, and people don't stand up. And I have to say, one of my issues during the lockdown period was, oh wow, how quickly people are willing to give away their freedoms when they are afraid, and understandably afraid, given the perceived threat at that time. But how different are we, and how different are our perceptions of VE Day and indeed of the war from those in Europe? Because we were never conquered. We didn't live under the Nazis. We weren't forced to surrender to them. How different are our memories and our history as a result of that?
I think there is a difference, and it's longer than just the war, because we haven't really been occupied as a nation for 1,000 years. Yeah. So we do have that difference in perspective, but we suffered terribly in terms of the Blitz and German bombing elsewhere. We committed a lot of soldiers to the war. Between Britain and the Empire, we put together 8.5 million men in the field, and I think we should remember the contribution of the Empire as it was. I mean, yeah. India had 1.5 million volunteers in the field, and fighting for a war which was not initially on their doorstep, although it turned up on their doorstep later on. But I do think that we should take some pride in saying that we were in at the beginning and we were in at the end, and we fought all the way through. And you can overdo the extent to which we were alone in 1940, because we did have a huge empire which spanned the globe, but we were in Europe the only ones left standing. If we had sued for peace in the summer of 1940, as a lot of perfectly sensible, perfectly rational people thought we should, that would have been it. The war would have been over and the Germans would have won. So I think we should take some credit for sticking the course.
Yeah, absolutely. I could agree with you more on that. Let's talk more about, we talk about people, fighting the battlefields, but let's also talk about, you mentioned the Blitz, the war on the home front, how this was total war for people, not just on the battlefields, in the air, at sea, but also at home. Talk us through what ordinary life was like for people until VE Day.
Well, I think for the first time, probably it was, as you say, total war. We'd seen a bit of that in the First World War, because there had been some air raids on Britain. There had been some Zeppelin raids. Middlesbrough, I think, had been shelled by German battleships. And there had been rationing, of course. But the Second World War was the first time that, in Britain anyway, you'd seen a whole nation had to devote its entire effort to war, and a whole nation had to suffer as well. Hundreds of thousands of civilians lost their lives, and you had a grinding 6 years of deprivation, of danger, of men being away, of families being disrupted, children who might never see their fathers for years after they were born, who, their fathers would come back as strangers. Yeah. Relationships which didn't last. You said earlier that rationing went on until the 50s. I mean, it also financially absolutely ruined us. Yeah. But there was no alternative, of course. So it was important in that here was a conflict which showed us the kind of full extent of how awful modern war was, because you weren't anymore thinking about, we'll send the army off and it will do X or Y.
And we'll just see it on the 6 o'clock news. It's happening over there.
Absolutely. You were committing the whole nation to a conflict which was existential and in which there was no guarantee of success. The stakes could not have been higher.
There's been a lot of denigration of some of our major historical figures in recent years, including Winston Churchill, absolute hero. I mean, certainly I was brought up to believe absolute hero, still believe right now. How significant was Winston Churchill in that victory?
Well, Churchill's fascinating in a way, because he had an incredibly long public career. I mean, he was elected as an MP in 1900. Yeah. He'd been in the British Army's last major cavalry charge in Sudan. But he had a lot of faults. He got a lot of stuff wrong. But by 1940, it didn't matter. He was the only person who had the depth of character, the vision, the determination, the sheer bloody-mindedness, if you like, to be the person who dragged us through the war. it wasn't certain that he would become Prime Minister when Chamberlain resigned. Most people thought it would be Lord Halifax. I think Lord Halifax thought it would be Lord Halifax until he realised that he wasn't up to it at that point.
Yeah.
And it had to be Churchill. But I think, there is a lot of revisionism about Churchill and, particularly about famines in India and all of that kind of thing. I think wherever you lie on that spectrum, it's missing the point. The point is he was the one person who was able to motivate what was a badly bruised and defeated nation, particularly after Dunkirk, which was only a short time into his premiership, and was able to keep us going all the way through the absolutely darkest times, and was able to say, no, look, this is terrible. He was very honest with the country. All we have to offer is blood, sweat, toil, and tears. This is very hard. We may not get there soon, but we will win eventually. Yeah. And his sort of motivational leadership is not to be underestimated. I think the idea that he's a sort of overblown figure is quite wrong. He was absolutely pivotal, and it could not have been anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I get goosebumps when you're even talking about it. I really do. Elliot Wilson, thank you so much. Really good to get your perspective on that. Historian and writer, and great to hear from you. And Philip Ingram, your response to what Elliot says.
Well, I think Elliot brings it out very eloquently, the importance of personality and the personality and the leader that's there.
I'm thinking whole time I'm thinking Zelensky in my head.
Getting the right personality at the right time. And when you look at conflicts around the world, it's personalities that start them, it's personalities that lead you down the path to victory or otherwise, and it's personalities that finish them. Yeah,
I mean, there are geopolitical reasons why our countries go to war, there are economic issues, there are all these other things that happen, but at the end of the day, often these decisions are actually decisions of individual men and women to go to war, to end war. Very, very much so. And you look at whether there's successes or failures in military campaigns, and you analyse the different commanders that there are at different levels, and often it's down to the way they lead their troops. Yeah. Here's another thing, leaders who believe in their country and think it's worth fighting for. Well, yes. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Just throwing that out there. 12:48 is the time. Up next, we're going to be talking about, Labour's latest woes, and all the different Labour groups are coming together to tell Keir Starmer to change tack if he doesn't want to be defeated by reform at the next election. We'll talk to Matthew Larser about that. This is Talk.
There is no reason for this country to have a trade deal with India. What benefit do we get out of a trade deal with India? Any goods we produce, which they want to buy, they have to buy anyway because they're high-tech goods made in the United Kingdom, incapable of being bought from anywhere else. We're not going to get any greater number of exports to India as a result of a trade deal. This favours, when you have a trade deal of the kind that's so imbalanced between the United Kingdom and India, where we have such high standards, such high regulations.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 12:50 is the time. Just have one last topic, and the woes of Keir Starmer and his leadership after that reform victory in the council elections, the Runcorn by-election last week, and a lot of pressure on the party leadership there, indeed on the Tory leadership as well, over that threat from Nigel Farage. Well, numerous groups of sort of factions of MPs on the Labour benches are now getting together to say, look, we need to change tack. Red Wall Group, others, and they also include the Blue Labour movement, movement led by the Labour peer and founder of that group, Lord Glassman. He said that working class Labour voters have been frozen out of the party by the woke thought police, and the party created a hostile environment. It was impossible where people can just speak their minds. Well, let's talk about this with former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Very, very good afternoon to you.
And to you, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. I mean, look, there's no problem speaking your mind on this show, but I'm certainly aware an awful lot of MPs over the years who do want to say things get frozen out. I mean, you know, you think about MPs talking about things, just simple things like grooming gangs, or indeed on the threat from trans women, trans-identified men entering women's spaces and taking women's rights. Certainly the Labour Party shut people out, but the big concern here is about ordinary voters just basically saying, I don't feel I can say what I want to say without someone shouting bigot, racist, transphobe or whatever at me, and I've had enough. And this is a party that doesn't represent me anymore. What would you say to that?
So I think there clearly is a perception from scores of voters across the country that Labour isn't on their side. That's how I would put it. I mean, it's interesting to reflect on this very special day when we're reflecting on VE Day, that just a few weeks later, Labour scored perhaps its greatest ever triumph with the election of the Attlee government. You know, there in the pictures is Clement Attlee standing next as Deputy Prime Minister, standing next to Churchill, on the balcony. So, and what happened in 1945 was the country, for the first time, Labour's first ever majority, people thought the voters thought Labour was on their side. Clearly, last week they didn't, and that is a job of work that the Labour Party has to do. I think there are many policies that Labour is pursuing that actually should demonstrate that, but that message certainly isn't getting across.
What are those policies? I'd love to know.
Well, I think investment in the NHS. I actually think respecting the court judgment on trans is one of those. I think common sense has been prevailed, and I hope.
You don't get brownie points for obeying the law. And they're not even obeying the law. They're allowing taxpayer-funded NHS hospitals and other organisations to flout the law, and they're still paying Stonewall to give them wrong advice.
Nothing to do about it. But look, I think that the biggest battle, between what you might call common sense Labour versus activist Labour is going to be over the environment. It's going to be my old boss Ed Miliband and seeing what happens in terms of getting energy prices down so that we can ensure that we protect British jobs. And the government's going to be publishing an industrial strategy in the next few weeks. The key test for Starmer is whether that includes a commitment to lower energy prices for industry.
You can only lower energy prices. You know, we've gone, hammer and tongs on this many, many times. If you get rid of these net zero pledges, the fundamental thing is, it's almost as if the only way that Keir Starmer will either win voters back, I wouldn't say keep voters, he's already lost an awful lot of them, he's way down in the polls, is to win voters back, would be to basically drop all of the things that he apparently holds true to. Net zero, an awful lot of, the higher taxes, paying for all these things, also the policies on migration. He's a human rights lawyer in his heart of hearts. Most of his mates are making big money, paying for their lovely Islington dinner parties through the asylum system and the like, and all these appeals. He's going to have to kind of go against every natural instinct that he has on every policy if he wants to win back voters.
Well, I'm not sure that his natural instincts, are as you describe them. Take migration. Labour's been very clear, migration, both legal and illegal, is too high. Now, the problem is we haven't seen delivery in terms of getting those numbers down. So, yes, there's a huge challenge to do that. If migration numbers are not down by the time of the next election, Keir Starmer won't be re-elected as Prime Minister.
I genuinely don't think he or Yvette Cooper, any of them, actually do think figures are too high. They know that voters think they're too high. They don't personally think there's a problem.
Well, I tell you, one person I think might not think that. That's the Attorney General, not the most glamorous job in government, not the person we hear about all the time, but he's the lawyer who serves the government and checks all the legislation before it can be enacted. And he is a human rights lawyer. His agenda seems to be out of kilter with what the majority of Labour opinion think. And I wonder if Keir's going to have the gumption to get rid of him at the reshuffle. That's what a lot of Labour MPs, whether they're badged red wall or something else, would like to see.
Well, that's interesting. All the different factions. Well, you sort of think when a Prime Minister gets elected, OK, not the biggest share of the voters he would have wanted, but a huge number of MPs, that actually, he can do what you want. But actually, you've now got a lot of people know, I'm never going to get a job in government. I can get away with voting against the government on various different issues. You get a lot of these different factions moving. And at the end of the day, most MPs want to make sure they can still pay their mortgage in 4 or 5 years' time. So their concerns are turning to that. We're seeing that in the Tories. I mean, it's fascinating. Kemi Badenoch, the new Tory newish Tory leader. She held a drinks party for Tory MPs yesterday. Only 25 of them turned up. I mean, there aren't many of them, but there are more than that. They were to ring round saying, for God's sake, turn up. That is a mark of how dangerous her position is. Now, not as easy to oust Keir Starmer, and of course, no one's really thinking about who the alternative would be. But I have to say, I can't see him keeping Ed Miliband or indeed Rachel Reeves in the job, certainly for the next election. Do you think either of them survive?
I think Ed is probably in a more vulnerable position than Rachel. I think he's made a commitment to keeping Rachel for the duration of the Parliament. And also, I think if you get rid of Rachel, you're effectively getting too close to home in terms of the blame. I think Ed will have to either change his tone and change some of his actions.
Drop net zero.
Yeah. In terms of the wider issue, look, Julia, there was a big problem. Labour MPs up and down the country, many of whom were elected on tiny majorities, on fairly small shares of the vote, are looking like and thinking, I'm going to be a one-term MP. Therefore, what do I do? Do I make a mark? Do I speak out? Do I try and become a personality, etc.? So there's a huge political management problem if Labour doesn't start going up in the polls. So yeah, Starmer's got a lot on his plate.
Yeah, absolutely does. Really good to talk to you. Thank you for speaking to us, Sir Matthew Lars, their former Labour Party advisor. Philip Ingram, if you were advising this Prime Minister, what would you tell him to do?
He needs to start to do something, start to listen to the people. What's very clear is that the Labour Party have come into government with no plan whatsoever. They've had lots of political sound bites that they've been churning out over the years, and they thought that that's what the voters wanted to hear. The voters don't want. They want substance, and he needs to get some substance.
Yeah, and again, people are just simply not willing to put up with sort of promise on this and promise on that, because we've had that from the Tories for years and not delivered. So the people are very wisely, I think, rather distrustful. It's interesting, of course, Reform capitalising on that because they haven't actually been in office, so they haven't got a track record to defend or broken promises. And love Nigel Farage, love a lot of their policies. At the end of the day, though, when you're in office, to govern is to choose.
Yeah. The one thing Keir Starmer is doing much better than the Tories is he's not delivering better.
Wonderful summary, wonderful summary. Philip Ingram, it's been such a pleasure having your company, and really appreciate on all this of all days, the 80th anniversary of VE Day, having you here in the studio with your very smart medals. Ian Collins has joined us right now. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon. We are, of course, going to be picking up on VE Day and speaking to some of that. I mean, I find it incredible when you speak to people who, were kids back then. Yeah. That would have informed their entire life. Everything that would have happened. You're 11 when war ended. We're going to be speaking to some of those people, and I just find that just extraordinary of what your young years entailed.
Yeah, I do worry though. Say we get to like the 90th anniversary, there'd be so few people around who have any memory, even as a child. Correct. Of those events, which and again they sort of go back into the distance, and then people forget. And I do worry. We were talking earlier on about the values and things like the way of paying tribute to the men and women who died is actually to hold the values they were fighting for, freedom and democracy.
Well, it's all of that, and just those. I know you can sort of wear certain rose-coloured glasses on things, but those certain innocent times, and you've got a voucher,
black and white.
A voucher for butter, for goodness' sake. Little things like that it must have informed an entire lifetime for those people.
Absolutely. Well, it's when black and white, right and wrong, there are times you just have to step up.
100%. But that's why I think we should